All right, let's dive deep into Dostoyevsky. We've got these excerpts from the Gospel in Dostoyevsky, and I have to say I'm really excited to kind of unpack how Dostoyevsky tackles these big questions, about faith and society.
Yeah, always interesting to kind of go back to Dostoevsky. He was able to weave these um, really complex philosophical and spiritual ideas into just these incredible stories.
Yeah, and he doesn't shy away from controversy either, right? Like this first passage from The Idiot, where Prince Mishkin basically says that Catholicism is worse than atheism. That's pretty mild.
Yeah, that's definitely a provocative statement, and I think it speaks to maybe a deeper concern that we see throughout Dostoevsky's work, right? So Mishkin is arguing here that when religion, any religion, becomes too focused on power or on dogma, it kind of loses the true essence of Christ's message.
Right, and he even says, they have trifled with the most holy, truthful, sincere, fervent feelings of the people. They have bartered it all for money, for base earthly power. It's like he's seeing this corruption almost at the heart of the institution.
Yeah, exactly. And this idea really connects to Dostoevsky's own, complex relationship with the Orthodox Church, right? He was a believer, but also like deeply critical of the church's role in society. So in Mishkin's words, we can hear some of Dostoevsky's own, struggles with faith and doubt.
It's interesting how Mishkin kind of links Catholicism, atheism, and socialism together. Like they're all symptoms of the same problem.
Yeah, right. He sees them all as reactions to what he perceives as the failure of traditional religion to really give people meaning and purpose in a world that's changing so rapidly. People are searching for something to believe in, and when they feel let down by the church, they turn to other ideologies.
And how can we apply this to today? Are we seeing any similar trends today?
It's a good question, I think. We definitely live in a world where institutions are questioned and people are maybe disillusioned with traditional structures of authority. So where do we find meaning and purpose in this world? Where do we turn for guidance, for hope?
Dostoevsky is sort of forcing us to look beyond the surface, beyond institutions, to find the essence of faith and spirituality.
Absolutely. And maybe that's why he shifts gears so much
Yeah.
in the next passage. He goes from these like big pronouncements to this really intimate story of Marie.
It's like, yeah, here we see Dostoevsky's empathy, his ability to portray the human condition in all its complexity. And Marie's story, it's heartbreaking. She's abandoned and ostracized. People treat her as less than human.
Right. And the passage doesn't shy away from the harsh reality of her situation, like the detail about how people are spitting on her and driving her away. It's really striking.
Yeah, it is. It shows how quickly society can cast out people who don't fit in.
Exactly.
But even in the midst of all this cruelty, there's this beautiful moment of grace in how the children respond to Marie. They give her compassion and acceptance when the adults don't.
It is a powerful contrast, isn't it? And it's important that Mishkin, who sees himself as childlike, he's the one who makes this connection happen between Marie and the children.
Right. He even says he prefers the company of children. So what is Dostoevsky trying to tell us about being childlike?
I think it's more than just innocence. It's about seeing the world without judgment, without prejudice. The children see Marie as a person who deserves love and respect no matter what.
So it's not about being naive. It's about having the courage to look past the labels that society puts on people.
Exactly. It's about seeing the worth in every person, even those who have been pushed aside or rejected. And that's a big challenge for us as listeners too, right? When have we lost that ability to just connect with other people on a human level?
Yeah. Makes you think about how quick we are to judge people based on past mistakes or perceived flaws instead of just seeing them for who they are.
Right, and this brings us back to faith. Maybe true faith isn't about sticking to strict rules or judging other people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about developing that compassion and understanding.
So we have this critique of institutions and then this story of individual compassion. It's like this tension between how society fails and the possibility for individual change.
Yeah, maybe Dostoevsky is saying that real change doesn't come from top-down structures, but from within, from each of us cultivating empathy and connections.
Such a fascinating idea. I can't wait to see how it plays out in the next passage.
Well, get ready for some drama. The next scene takes us right into this love triangle, and it's full of passion, jealousy, and some really shocking behavior.
Yeah.
This passage, oh man, it's like a whirlwind of emotions. We're dropped right into this incredibly tense scene, right, with Mishkin, Nastasia Filipovna, and Rogozhin. It all takes place at Ganya's family's house, And let me tell you, it doesn't take long for things to get out of control.
Yeah, the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. It's like all these pent-up feelings and resentments are just boiling over. We have Nastasia Filipovna, this incredibly beautiful and intelligent woman who has been just used and mistreated. And then there's Ganya, who wants to marry her, but you kind of get the feeling it's more about social status and money for him than actual love. And of course, we have Rogozhin, who's just consumed by this intense passion for Nastasia Filipovna.
Right. And don't forget about Ganya's family, who are completely horrified by this whole thing. They see Nastasia Filipovna as like a threat to their reputation, like she's going to bring them down.
Yeah, it's like a recipe for disaster. Then you have Rogozhin, who bursts in like with this whole entourage, and he's throwing money around like it's nothing. He's basically trying to buy Nastasia Filipovna away from Ganya.
It's such a wild, over-the-top gesture.
Yeah.
But it really shows just how destructive money can be, don't you think? It's like Rogozhin is trying to possess her, to control her, and he's using his wealth to do it.
It's so dehumanizing, really. And it just shows how women were often seen as objects in that society, particularly women like Nastasia Filipovna, who didn't fit into the neat little boxes that society tried to put them in.
Dostoyevsky is really good at using scenes like this to show the hypocrisy and corruption that exists beneath the surface of this, polite society.
Yeah, and it's not just Rogozhin either, right? Ganya's sister, Varya, she actually spits in her own brother's face, and then Ganya, he just snaps. He slaps Mishkin out of frustration and humiliation.
Yeah, these are characters who are pushed to their absolute limit, consumed by jealousy and greed and this desperate need to protect their social image.
And in the middle of all this craziness, you have Mishkin. He's just standing there, and he looks at Ganya with this look and says, "Oh, how ashamed you will be of what you've done." I mean, come on, that's such a powerful line.
Mishkin's like this moral compass in a world that's gone completely mad. He sees right through Ganya's anger and recognizes the shame and self-hatred that's driving him. It's like he's holding up a mirror to Ganya's soul, forcing him to confront his actions.
And what's even more interesting is how Nastasia Filipovna reacts. It's like Mishkin's words kind of cut through her defenses. She kisses Nina Alexandrovna's hand, Ganya's sister, almost like she's asking for forgiveness or seeing her own self-worth for the first time.
Yeah, it's this brief moment, but it suggests that even in this environment, this chaotic, aggressive environment, there's still a possibility for change, for redemption. Like Mishkin's kindness, his refusal to meet violence with violence, somehow awakens something in Nastasia Filipovna.
It's like he's showing them, and us as readers, that there's a different way to exist in the world, that even surrounded by darkness, we can choose to act with compassion and integrity.
Exactly, and that choice, as Dostoyevsky shows us, can have these ripple effects that touch the lives of those around us in ways we could never imagine.
It makes you think about how we react when we're caught up in our own conflicts. Do we respond with anger? Or do we try to, approach things with compassion and understanding even when it's tough?
It's a challenge, no doubt.
Yeah.
But Dostoyevsky reminds us that it's a challenge worth facing.
Okay, so we've been through these really intense, thought-provoking passages. What are some key takeaways that we want to leave the listener with?
Well, I think these excerpts give us a powerful glimpse into Dostoyevsky's view of humanity. He saw that we have the capacity for both good and evil within us. He wasn't afraid to show us the ugliness, the greed, hypocrisy, the violence that could erupt when we let fear and selfishness drive us.
But he also shows us the possibility of redemption, the power of compassion and forgiveness.
Exactly, and I think one of the biggest takeaways is the idea that real faith isn't about blindly following rules or judging others. It's about developing compassion and understanding, even when faced with suffering and injustice.
And it's about recognizing the value and dignity in every person, no matter what mistakes they've made or what flaws we think they have.
And that brings us to this really interesting concept that comes up, the idea of fools for Christ. It might sound kind of strange at first, but I think it says something really profound about what faith is and how it pushes us to live differently.
I'm curious to hear more about this. What exactly did Dostoyevsky mean by fools for Christ?
It's not about being foolish in the traditional sense. It's more about having the courage to live by a different set of values, to prioritize compassion over judgment, to choose humility over pride.
So it's about challenging the status quo, even if it makes you seem unconventional, even foolish in the eyes of the world.
Exactly. And in that sense, I think a lot of Dostoyevsky's characters, like Prince Mishkin and even Marie in her own way, they embody this foolishness. They don't conform to the expectations of their society. They follow a different kind of moral compass.
It's like they're pointing toward a different way of life, a way of living that emphasizes love and compassion and a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And that's such a powerful message, especially today. In a world that often seems driven by greed and competition and self-interest, maybe we need more of these fools for Christ to remind us of what really matters.
It's a challenging thought, but one that really resonates with me. It makes you wonder, what would it look like to embrace that foolishness in our own lives? How could we challenge the norms and expectations that stop us from living more authentically and compassionately?
Those are some really great questions to think about, and I think they're perfect for us to consider as we head into the final part of our deep dive.
Dostoyevsky, he's really giving us this roadmap, not like with rules or anything, but through these characters, They're flawed, they struggle, but somehow they really get to you.
Yeah, and that's what makes his work so powerful, right? It's not about preaching or giving you easy answers.
Yeah.
It's about wrestling with these really tough questions, like what does it even mean to be human? What about faith, morality?
Yeah, this idea of fools for Christ, it's really stuck with me. It's like he's challenging us to rethink what's important, to question what society tells us.
Right. It takes courage to stand out, to be different, even when people don't get it, even when they make fun of you.
And I think that idea really connects with people today, People who are searching for something real, for a life that means something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. And maybe, in a way, we all have a little bit of that fool for Christ in us, that part that wants something more than just superficial stuff, the material things, the selfishness.
Yeah, like he's calling us to tap into that deeper part of ourselves, the part that wants to make a difference, connect with people, live a life that actually reflects what we believe.
And maybe that's what Dostoyevsky was trying to show us all along through his characters and their journeys. Even when things are hard, even when there's so much darkness, there's always the potential for love, for compassion, for finding redemption.
That message is so relevant even today. It's like he understood something about being human that's timeless.
That's the beauty of great literature, right? It speaks to us across generations. It challenges us, inspires us, makes us think about our lives in new ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dostoyevsky, I'm left feeling hopeful. Like, even though the world can be crazy and unpredictable, there's still room for kindness, empathy, for that foolishness that reminds us what's truly important.
I love that. And maybe that's the best thing we can take away from Dostoyevsky, that even when things seem dark, the human spirit can still shine through.
It's been amazing exploring these ideas with you. Thanks for sharing your insights and for helping us get into the mind of this literary giant.
It's always a pleasure talking about Dostoyevsky. His work is a gift, really.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe inspired you to check out Dostoyevsky's work. Until next time, keep searching for that light within, and remember, a little bit of foolishness just might change the world.
All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at Dostoyevsky.
Oh, wow, Dostoyevsky.
Always a good time.
We're doing a deep dive into the Brothers Karamazov,
Okay.
specifically Chapter 5.
Right.
The Devil.
Catchy title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we could talk for hours about all the ins and outs of the whole book, but
Yeah.
we're really interested in this chapter.
Yeah. What is it about the devil that drew you to it?
It's Dostoevsky, right? So we're dealing with a very specific type of devil here.
Right, right.
And we find ourselves sort of dropped right into the middle of what seems to be either a dream or a hallucination
Yeah.
that is being experienced by Ivan Karamazov.
Yeah.
Now, Ivan is
One of the brothers.
one of the brothers.
Of the
Yes.
Karamazov brothers.
And he's an interesting character because he's a self-proclaimed atheist.
Right.
But here he is face to face with the devil, right? Yeah, so it's like almost like Dostoevsky is setting this up to really kind of poke at the idea of atheism a little bit,
Yeah.
What happens when a staunch non-believer is confronted by this ultimate symbol of faith?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can definitely see that happening.
Yeah.
So before we get to the devil himself,
Right.
can you give us a little context? Why is Ivan in this state to begin with?
Yeah. So just prior to this chapter, Ivan learns that his half-brother Dmitri has been wrongly imprisoned for the murder of their father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and here's the catch. Ivan believes that he himself is partly responsible.
Oh.
He thinks that his ideas, his conversations might have influenced the actual murderer, Smerdyakov.
Wow.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, that's a lot to carry around.
Exactly. And that's precisely what Dostoyevsky is doing here. He's putting Ivan under this immense psychological pressure.
Right.
To the point where he starts having these hallucinations,
Right.
even while he's refusing to fully succumb to his illness. It's like his mind is trying to process this intense guilt.
Yeah. But Ivan, the rational atheist, is fighting back.
Yeah. So, is this devil just a figment of his imagination then?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dostoyevsky is a master of ambiguity.
Right.
Could spell things out for us.
Right.
But even if this visitor is just a hallucination,
Right.
he's still a product of Ivan's psyche, right?
Yeah.
And that tells us something about the darkness and the complexity that's lurking within Ivan, beneath that surface of rationality.
Okay, so let's meet this mysterious visitor then.
Okay.
What's he like?
He's described as a Russian gentleman of a particular type, seemingly impoverished yet with this, like, a hint of former high-class society.
Okay.
Dostoevsky really emphasizes the details of his appearance.
Right.
Slightly out-of-fashion clothing,
Aye.
a missing watch, but a fancy lorgnette and an opal ring. It's like he's trying to project this image of respectability,
Right.
but not quite pulling it off.
He's trying a little too hard. Yeah. Yeah, and that sense of being a poor relation is important because it connects to his self-proclaimed identity as a fallen angel.
Oh,
He even embraces this status, claiming to love humanity and enjoy these earthly experiences, even the mundane ones.
Okay, so a fallen angel who loves humanity.
Yeah.
This isn't exactly our typical
No.
image of Satan.
Right. Not the fire and brimstone devil.
Not at all.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so intriguing.
Yeah.
He's more subtle, more insidious, and that makes him all the more unsettling.
Yeah, so how does Ivan react to this visitor?
Well, initially he's hostile and dismissive.
Okay.
Even a bit rude, actually.
Okay.
But the visitor remains unfazed. He's affable, he's persistent,
Oh,
just won't leave Ivan alone.
Like a pesky relative or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a purpose to his persistence. He wants to engage Ivan in a debate,
Okay.
this battle of wits and beliefs.
Okay, so what are they debating? What's going on?
Well, the visitor starts probing Ivan about his atheism. He asks these provocative questions, challenges his logic, even throws in a few personal jabs, just to
get under his skin?
Yeah, for good measure.
Sure.
But here's the kicker. He claims to be ignorant about the existence of God.
Wait, he claims to be the devil,
Yeah.
but doesn't believe in God. How does that?
Yeah, you're catching up. This is where Dostoyevsky starts playing with our expectations.
Right.
Is the visitor being truthful?
Right.
Is he deliberately contradicting himself to mess with Ivan?
Right.
Or is there something deeper going on here? Something about the nature of faith and doubt that defies these simple explanations?
Okay, my brain is starting to hurt a little bit.
That's Dostoyevsky for you, right?
Yeah, he'll do that to you.
He loves to push the boundaries of logic and make his readers really think.
Yeah.
Now, to illustrate this point, the visitor tells Ivan a story, an anecdote about a condemned atheist.
Okay, I love a good story.
Yeah.
What happens here?
All right, so this atheist is sentenced to walk a quadrillion kilometers after death before reaching heaven. It's a ridiculously long journey, right?
Yeah.
Meant to symbolize the vastness of existence and the absurdity of human life.
So does he actually walk all that way?
That's the fascinating part. So initially he's defiant, refusing to budge.
Right.
But after millions of years of stubbornness, something shifts.
Okay.
He starts walking, and through this arduous journey, he experiences this transformation. It's as if the very act of walking, of pushing himself to the limit, opens him up to this new understanding of faith and the possibility of something beyond this limited worldview.
So what does this have to do with Ivan?
Well, here's where it gets really mind-bending.
Okay.
Ivan realizes he actually invented the anecdote himself.
What?
It's a product of his own imagination, even though he has no memory of creating it.
So the devil is quoting Ivan's own story back to him.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
I think this is Dostoyevsky's way of showing us that even in our most defiant moments,
Right.
even when we think we've shut out all possibility of faith, there's still a part of us that yearns for something more, something beyond the purely rational.
Okay, so we've got a self-proclaimed atheist,
Yes.
haunted by a devil who claims not to believe in God,
Right.
who's quoting Ivan's own story about a condemned atheist who finds faith through an impossible journey.
It's a lot to unpack, I know.
My head is spinning. What happens next?
Well, you'll have to wait for part 2 to find out.
Okay.
Trust me, things are about to get even more intense.
All right, so we left off with the devil quoting Ivan's own story back to him.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's like,
What's the devil up to here?
Well, the visitor, he actually reveals his strategy.
Okay.
He's playing the long game.
Okay.
He's deliberately kind of manipulating Ivan's belief and disbelief,
Okay.
planting a seed of faith that he hopes will eventually grow.
Okay, so no fire and brimstone,
No.
no tempting him with like earthly pleasures.
It's more psychological.
More subtle.
Yeah, much more insidious.
So he's really playing on
Ivan's intellect, his doubts, his guilt.
Right, because Ivan thinks he's complicit
Exactly.
in his father's murder.
Yeah, the visitor even goes so far as to suggest that Ivan's atheism is just a defense mechanism.
Oh, wow.
You know, a way to avoid taking responsibility for his actions.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
So how does Ivan react to that?
Well, he doesn't take it lying down.
Okay.
He lashes out, both verbally and physically, actually.
Oh, really?
In fact, he becomes so frustrated that he hurls a glass at the visitor.
Oh, my gosh. Does that get rid of him?
Not a chance.
Okay.
The visitor seems entirely unaffected, almost amused by Ivan's outburst.
Okay.
He mocks Ivan, comparing him to a hysterical woman.
Wow.
It's a very deliberate attempt to further undermine Ivan's sense of control.
Right.
His masculine pride, even.
Okay, so if this devil is not this, like, imposing figure of darkness,
Right.
and he can't be easily banished,
Right.
what is he?
Well, that's the brilliance of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dostoyevsky leaves us to grapple with that ambiguity.
Right.
Is the visitor a literal devil?
Right.
A hallucination?
Right.
A symbol of Ivan's own inner turmoil?
Yeah.
Or maybe some combination of all three?
Yeah. He's not giving us any easy answers.
No easy answers, exactly.
So, okay, so we've got this, like...
Playing with our expectations.
Yeah, he's playing with our expectations about the nature of evil.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm.
But this visitor is not just like a menacing figure.
Yeah.
He's also got these kind of moments of almost like vulnerability.
Yes.
Didn't he confess a longing to sing with the angels?
You're absolutely right to pick up on that.
Yeah.
It's one of the most surprising and perplexing moments in the chapter.
Yeah.
This devil who claims to love humanity,
Right.
who delights in these earthly pleasures,
Yeah.
also expresses this fleeting desire to join the heavenly chorus,
Right.
to experience this pure joy of praising God.
It's a wild contradiction.
Yeah, it challenges the traditional view of the devil as purely evil,
Right.
as entirely separate from good.
Right. Right.
Dostoyevsky is suggesting that even the darkest of beings might have this glimmer of longing for something better,
Right.
something more pure.
It kind of makes him seem almost human.
Exactly. It humanizes him in a way.
Yeah.
It makes him a much more complex and frankly unsettling figure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It makes me wonder if Dostoevsky is suggesting that
Yeah.
evil is not just some kind of external force.
Right.
It's something that's like within us all.
I think that's a very insightful interpretation.
Okay.
And it really connects to one of Dostoyevsky's central themes. You know,
Yeah.
this idea that good and evil are not separate,
Right.
but intertwined.
Right.
That the human heart is capable of both profound love
Right.
and profound darkness.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a devil who loves humanity,
Right.
yearns for heaven,
Yeah.
and uses psychological manipulation instead of brute force.
Right.
I'm starting to think this is the most complex devil I've ever encountered.
He's a tough one to pin down.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But, he also did boast about ruining thousands for the sake of saving one.
That's right.
So there's still this, like...
A chillingly pragmatic side to him as well.
Right. So he's not some, like, cuddly, misunderstood devil.
No.
He's still a force to be reckoned with.
Right, right.
Okay, so we've explored his contradictory nature,
Yeah.
his methods, his motivations.
Right.
But what's the point of all this?
Yeah.
Why is Dostoevsky putting Ivan through all this?
Well, I think he's using this encounter to force Ivan and us as readers to confront the devil within ourselves.
Okay.
You know, that darkness, the doubt, the guilt that we often try to suppress.
So it's not just a story about
Mm.
a devil tormenting an atheist.
It's a story about the human condition,
Right, right.
the struggle between faith and doubt,
Yeah.
good and evil, reason and irrationality.
And as we're talking, I keep thinking about that knocking at the window
Right.
that ends the excerpt.
Yeah,
It's such a chilling image.
It is, isn't it?
Like a wake-up call. It's like reality is trying to break through.
Yeah, like a crack in the facade.
Yeah.
of this mental and emotional turmoil that's been going on.
What do you think it signifies?
That's a great question, and one that leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive, because that knocking, that interruption, symbolizes this intrusion of the real world
Right.
into Ivan's feverish nightmare, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, that knocking at the window, it's like a reminder that all this can't just stay in his head forever.
It can't. No, it's like Dostoyevsky leaves us hanging there, at the end of the excerpt. It makes you wonder what happens next.
Right, right.
But I think it gives us a clue.
But,
Remember, this whole encounter has been confined to Ivan's room, the inner world, right?
right,
That knocking suggests that whatever is going on inside him, it can't stay contained forever.
right.
It's going to spill out into the real world
Yeah.
with real consequences.
So who or what do you think is behind that knocking?
Well, it could be a number of people, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's Dmitri's fiancée, Katerina Ivanovna,
Okay.
desperately seeking news. Or perhaps it's Alyosha, Ivan's younger brother, sensing his distress.
Okay.
But, the identity of the knocker is almost beside the point.
Okay.
What matters is the interruption itself.
So it's more about the symbolic meaning
Exactly.
than like the actual person.
Think about it. Ivan's been grappling with this guilt over his father's murder.
Right.
He's been confronted by this devil who's challenged his atheism,
Right.
forced him to look inward.
Right.
That knocking, it represents the consequences of his thoughts and his actions.
Oh, okay.
This inevitable intrusion of the outside world.
So he can't just stay locked in this internal struggle forever.
No, exactly. He can't hide from reality no matter how much he might want to.
Yeah, and that brings us to this really crucial question, I think. How does this encounter, this descent into the depths of his own psyche?
Yeah.
How does this shape Avon?
Right.
Does he succumb to the devil within? Or does he find some way to kind of reconcile his reason with these forces of faith and doubt that have been unleashed?
Big questions.
Yeah, does he go mad?
Well, that's the beauty of Dostoyevsky, isn't it?
Yeah.
He doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow.
Right.
He leaves us with these possibilities,
Yeah.
questions that linger long after we finish the book.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but it's also kind of brilliant.
It's both, right?
Yeah.
I understand that feeling of wanting those answers,
Sure.
but think about it this way. Wouldn't it be a disservice to the complexity of Dostoyevsky's work if he just told us what to think?
Right.
By leaving things open-ended.
Yeah.
He's inviting us to become active participants in the story,
Right.
to wrestle with these questions ourselves.
So we're left to sort of imagine how Ivan navigates the aftermath of this encounter.
Exactly. And I think there are a few key takeaways we can glean from our deep dive here that might help us understand Ivan's trajectory.
Okay.
First, we see the destructive power of guilt and these unresolved moral conflicts. Ivan's internal turmoil literally manifests itself
Yeah.
in this terrifying yet strangely compelling visitor.
It's like his conscience taking on a physical form or something.
Exactly. And second, we see the complex and often contradictory nature of belief and disbelief.
Right.
Ivan, despite his atheism,
Yeah.
is drawn to the visitor's words, almost tempted to believe.
Right.
It suggests that even the most ardent non-believer can't entirely escape those existential questions,
Right.
those yearnings for something beyond the material world.
And lastly, I think we see the power of Dostoevsky's psychological realism.
Yes.
I mean, even though this whole scene takes place in this dream or hallucination, it feels incredibly real,
it does.
incredibly human. We all have our own devils to confront,
Absolutely.
our own struggles with doubt, guilt, and temptation.
And that's why this chapter, this deep dive into the darkest corners of Ivan Karamazov's psyche, it's
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have the capacity for both darkness and light. Yeah.
And that the choices we make in those moments of crisis ultimately define who we are.
So what's the final takeaway for our listener today as they go about their day? What should they be thinking about?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that this isn't just a story about some 19th century Russian intellectual having a breakdown.
Right.
It's a story about all of us,
Yeah.
It's a challenge to confront our own devils,
Yeah.
to examine our beliefs,
Yeah.
and to engage in those difficult conversations with ourselves and with the world around us,
Right.
because it's in those dark
Yeah.
and uncomfortable spaces that we often discover the most profound truths about ourselves
Yeah.
and about the human condition.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive, but as always, the conversation doesn't end here.
It never does.
We encourage you to continue exploring Dostoyevsky's work, to ponder the questions that we've raised.
Absolutely.
And to engage in your own deep dives.
Yes.
Into the mysteries of the human heart.
Until next time, keep exploring.
All right, so today we're diving into Dostoyevsky.
Ooh, Dostoyevsky.
Yeah, one of the most intense and thought-provoking sections of the Brothers Karamazov.
Right.
And we're focusing on the chapter titled Rebellion.
Rebellion.
Where Ivan Karamazov just unleashes this torrent of ideas about suffering and faith and the existence of evil.
It's a big one.
Yeah, and you know, you might already know that this conversation kind of sets the stage for Ivan's even more famous Grand Inquisitor poem.
Right.
But we're gonna get to that later.
Sure.
For now.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on why this chapter is so powerful all on its own.
Yeah. I think what's so fascinating about Rebellion is how it just throws you right into the middle of like a deeply personal and philosophical crisis.
It is.
You know, Ivan isn't just debating abstract concepts.
Right.
He's wrestling with the very foundations of his beliefs.
Yeah.
And even his ability to like feel love in a world filled with so much pain.
You're right, because he's grappling with this idea with his younger brother Alyosha, who represents a very different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But right off the bat, Ivan drops this bombshell.
Yeah.
He says he can't understand how anyone can truly love their neighbor.
Yeah. It's a pretty extreme statement.
It is a very extreme statement.
To understand why he says that, we have to really delve into Ivan's core argument.
Okay.
And his belief is that love, true empathy, it becomes almost impossible when you're confronted with like the rawness of human suffering up close.
Yeah.
And he uses this really striking example of a Saint John the Merciful.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Who embraced a diseased beggar.
I remember that part.
Right.
And it's supposed to be this beautiful act of compassion.
It is, yeah.
But Ivan spins it in a totally different way.
He does. Ivan argues that John's act was more about duty and self-punishment than genuine love.
Yeah.
And he's suggesting that human compassion has these limits. And this is where we start to see the seeds of his rebellion taking root.
I see.
But it's important to understand that Ivan's main issue isn't with suffering in general.
Right.
It's with the suffering of children.
Yes.
That's what really fuels his fire.
It's the innocent suffering.
Exactly.
That's at the center of his argument.
It is. And to drive this point home, he doesn't hold back at all.
No, he does not.
He shares a series of incredibly disturbing anecdotes.
They're really hard to stomach.
I know,
they're difficult. There's one about the criminal who finds solace in watching children play outside his prison window.
Right.
Even though
he murdered children.
He murdered children himself.
Yeah.
And then there's that chilling account of the Turks torturing children for amusement, which Ivan calls artistic cruelty.
Yeah. And it's all so brutal and graphic.
It is. I'm curious, why do you think Dostoyevsky uses such disturbing imagery?
I think it's a deliberate strategy to kind of shake the reader, and in our case, the listener,
out
of any complacency.
Okay.
These horrifying images force us to confront
like
the depths of human cruelty.
Yes.
Something that Ivan argues is incompatible with the idea of a loving God. You know, this directly challenges the concept of theodicy.
For those
unfamiliar with the term theodicy, is the attempt to reconcile the existence of a benevolent God with the reality of evil and suffering in the world.
It's like he's deliberately pushing us to the edge of our comfort zones, forcing us to ask if God is good. Why does this kind of suffering exist, especially among those who are innocent?
Exactly, and he doesn't stop there.
No.
Ivan even describes these scenes of everyday cruelty in Russian society.
Like the peasant whipping a horse?
Yes, focusing on the pain in the animal's eyes.
And then there's that disturbingly casual description of parents finding pleasure in beating their young daughter.
It's awful. But he's showing us that this kind of cruelty isn't limited to some far-off land or a specific group of people.
Exactly.
It's all around us, woven into the fabric of society.
It's like he's saying, look, this is the reality of the world we live in. Are we really going to pretend that this somehow fits into a grand, harmonious plan?
Yeah. Are we going to look away?
And then, as if all of that wasn't enough to make you question everything, he drops this bombshell that he's written a poem
Well, yeah.
called The Grand Inquisitor
The Grand
that
Inquisitor.
explores these themes even further.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, hold on, I'm just getting started.
Right, he leaves us hanging,
Yeah.
wanting to know more.
I want to know more.
But even without reading the poem,
Yeah.
we can already see how these ideas,
Okay.
especially his focus on the suffering of children,
Right.
are building towards his big declaration of rebellion.
Okay, so before we dive into that,
Okay.
and I want to pause here and ask you, as a listener, what stands out to you
Hmm.
in this first part of our deep dive?
Mm.
Is it the disturbing imagery,
Yeah.
the philosophical questions about good and evil,
Mm.
or something else entirely?
Right.
Think about it for a second as we prepare to explore what Ivan's rebellion really means
Okay.
and how it challenges not only traditional religious beliefs,
Mm.
but our very understanding of morality and justice.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so we've seen how Ivan uses these like disturbing and very graphic stories to make a point about the reality of suffering, particularly for children.
Right.
And he set us up for this rebellion,
Yeah.
which is a huge part of why this chapter is so compelling.
I agree.
What I'm curious about is what exactly is he rebelling against?
Well, it's not as simple as just rebelling against God.
Okay.
It's more nuanced than that.
All right.
He's rebelling against this whole idea that we should just accept a universe
Right.
where innocent beings suffer.
To maintain some kind of cosmic harmony?
Exactly. He's basically saying, if that's the price of happiness,
Yeah.
then I don't want any part of it.
That really resonates with me. It's that feeling of, if this is the system,
Mm-hmm.
I'm rejecting the entire thing.
Yeah. He's not buying into this idea that we should just passively accept suffering
Right.
as part of some greater good.
And to really drive this home,
Yeah.
he presents Alyosha with that thought experiment.
Right.
Would you create a utopia
Hmm.
if it meant even one child had to suffer for it?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
And Alyosha, true to his character, answers with a soft but firm no.
That no speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does.
It highlights the immense moral weight of Ivan's argument.
Yes.
He's saying that even paradise, even complete happiness,
Right.
isn't worth it if it's built on the foundation of someone else's pain,
Yeah.
especially a child's pain.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Ivan's rebellion.
Okay.
He acknowledges the limits of human understanding.
That's interesting.
He even rejects what he calls Euclidean nonsense,
Mm.
this idea that we can neatly explain everything in the universe.
Like using logic and reason.
Using logic and reason alone. He's
Yeah.
basically saying that when it comes to suffering and faith,
Yeah.
we can't rely solely on our intellect.
So it's not just about rejecting a specific religious doctrine.
It's about questioning the very way we try to make sense of the world.
Exactly.
He's grappling with those big existential questions
No,
that
Doc
go
Johnson.
beyond simple answers.
It's not black and white.
No, it's not.
And what makes it so compelling is that it's not just a philosophical exercise for Ivan.
Right.
He's deeply troubled by what he sees.
He is.
Remember how he talks about his own need for justice?
Yes.
He says, I must have justice or I will destroy myself.
It shows just how personal this struggle is for him.
It really does.
He's not detached or indifferent
No,
to the suffering he witnesses.
not at all.
It consumes him.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us back to his central argument,
Okay.
the suffering of children.
Right.
He just can't accept that their pain could somehow be part of a larger harmonious plan.
Yeah,
It's morally repugnant to him.
it is. And he even goes so far as to say that no one, not even God, has the right to forgive the suffering of children.
That's such a powerful statement.
It is.
It's challenged.
And you know what?
Yeah.
He'd rather live with what he calls
Yeah.
unavenged suffering and unsatisfied indignation than accept a world
All right.
where such pain is brushed aside or explained away
It's unacceptable to him.
completely. And this is where his rebellion reaches its peak.
But, amidst all of Ivan's intense skepticism and questioning, we have Alyosha,
Right.
who represents a very different perspective.
Right. Alyosha the ever-faithful
Yes.
still clings to his belief in a God who can redeem all suffering,
Right.
who offers a path to forgiveness and reconciliation.
It's important to point out that Alyosha's faith isn't blind.
No,
He sees the same suffering that torments Ivan.
he does. In fact, he's often the one
Right.
called upon to comfort those who are hurting.
So it's not like he's naive or detached from reality.
Absolutely. His faith seems to have been forged
Yeah.
through his experiences and observations.
And while he doesn't directly counter all of Ivan's points,
Right.
he offers a contrasting worldview.
Mhm.
He believes in a God who is ultimately just and merciful,
Yeah,
even if we can't always grasp that justice in our limited human understanding.
it's like Dostoyevsky is presenting us with two sides of the same coin,
It is.
both valid in their own way.
You have Ivan, the brilliant skeptic, wrestling with the problem of evil, and Alyosha, the compassionate believer, finding solace and meaning in his faith.
And these two contrasting perspectives, these two brothers,
Right.
make for such a captivating and thought-provoking dynamic.
It's classic Dostoyevsky.
It is, he pits these two forces against each other,
Right.
constantly pushing and pulling, leaving us to grapple with the complexities of faith, doubt, and suffering.
It's so interesting how even as Ivan is making this case for rebellion,
Yeah.
he drops this tantalizing hint about the Grand Inquisitor.
Right.
It's like he's saying, hold on, I have even more to say about this, but it's going to be even more intense.
It's such a brilliant narrative strategy.
It is.
It could have ended the chapter with Ivan's declaration of rebellion,
Right.
but instead he gives us this glimpse
Right.
into something even deeper,
Right.
even more unsettling.
He's inviting us further down the rabbit hole to explore the depth of Ivan's critique on faith and reason.
And that's where the Grand Inquisitor comes in.
That's right.
But before we delve into that,
Yeah.
let's take a moment to reflect on what we've already uncovered in Rebellion.
Okay.
Ivan has given us a lot to process,
He has.
especially his arguments about suffering children
Right.
and his ultimate rejection of a world built on the pain of innocence.
He's challenging us to think critically about our own beliefs and our own responses to suffering.
I agree.
What resonates with you more? Ivan's rebellion or Alyosha's faith?
Right.
Or do you find yourself somewhere in between?
Right.
Take a moment to consider this before we head into the final part of our deep dive into Rebellion,
Okay.
where we'll explore the lasting impact of these ideas and how they continue to resonate with us today. We've been really kind of digging deep into Ivan Karamazov's Rebellion against this whole idea of accepting a universe where innocent suffering is somehow necessary or even acceptable. He's given us these incredibly disturbing images and philosophical arguments.
He really has.
Challenging us to think about, our own beliefs about faith and justice and even the meaning of existence.
Well, what strikes me is that Ivan's Rebellion isn't just like an intellectual exercise.
Right.
It's born out of this deep empathy for those who suffer, especially children.
Yeah, he can't stomach the idea that their pain is somehow part of a grand cosmic plan.
Yeah, it just doesn't compute for him.
It doesn't, and this leads him to reject any notion of a harmonious universe built on that kind of suffering.
He'd rather live with unanswered questions and a sense of outrage than accept a world where such injustice is just kind of brushed aside.
And he pushes Alyosha and us as listeners to confront this moral dilemma head on.
With that thought experiment, would you create a utopia?
If it meant even one child had to suffer for it.
Yeah, and Alyosha's answer,
a quiet but firm no,
really underscores the weight of that question.
It does.
It suggests that even a perfect world wouldn't be worth it if it came at such a high cost.
It's a question that forces us to examine our own values and priorities.
Yeah, what are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of happiness or progress? And can we truly find meaning in a world where innocent suffering just seems to be an inevitable part of the equation?
And this brings us to another key aspect of Ivan's Rebellion.
Okay.
His acknowledgement of the limits of human understanding. He rejects this idea that we can neatly explain everything through logic and reason alone.
He calls it Euclidean nonsense.
Yeah, this belief that the universe operates according to these rigid, predictable set of rules.
He's recognizing that there are mysteries we may never fully grasp.
Why?
Especially when it comes to questions of suffering and faith.
It's as if he's saying, we can't pretend to have all the answers, especially when we're confronted with such profound and unsettling realities.
What makes Dostoyevsky such a brilliant writer,
I agree,
is that he captures this struggle in all its complexity.
Oh, he does.
He doesn't offer easy solutions or force us to choose sides.
Right.
He presents both Ivan's rebellion and Alyosha's faith as valid responses
To the human condition.
to the human condition, leaving us to wrestle with these questions ourselves.
He's giving us a glimpse into the human heart.
He is.
With all its contradictions and complexities.
Amazing.
And he's doing it with such raw, emotional honesty
Right.
that it's impossible to remain detached or indifferent.
It's true. It's a testament to his genius
Right.
that he can explore
Right.
such profound philosophical and theological ideas
Right.
in a way that feels so immediate and relevant,
Yeah.
even today.
And that brings us to like the lasting impact of rebellion.
Yeah.
Even though we haven't even delved into the Grand Inquisitor yet,
Right.
Ivan's arguments have already planted this seed of doubt. A sense of unease that kind of lingers long after we finish reading.
He's forced us to confront uncomfortable truths
Yeah.
about ourselves and the world we inhabit.
And he's challenged us to think critically about our own beliefs and values.
Yeah, I agree.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into rebellion,
Okay.
I want to leave you with this.
Mm-hmm.
What does Ivan's rebellion mean for you?
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the existence of suffering with your own understanding of the world, of faith, of justice?
Any questions?
Do you find yourself aligning more with Ivan's defiant rejection of a flawed system? Or do you find solace in Alyosha's unwavering belief in a redemptive God?
Right.
Perhaps like Dostoyevsky himself, you find yourself somewhere in between, grappling with these questions, seeking meaning and understanding.
Is it, Sharon?
In a world that often seems to defy both.
It really does.
Thanks for joining us as we took a deep dive
Yeah, this is great.
into one of the most challenging and thought-provoking chapters in literature. All right, let's dive in. Today we're exploring Dostoyevsky, some pretty intense excerpts.
Intense is right.
Yeah, and we're focusing on the brothers Karamazov and The Idiot, two of his most famous books.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're going to be looking specifically at suffering, redemption, and faith.
Big topics.
Absolutely they are. And, Dostoyevsky's own life really kind of like shines through these themes, right? It's not just theoretical for him.
Right. He's been through it himself.
Yeah, like his near execution experience.
Yeah, that's got to shape how you view the world.
Totally.
Yeah.
So to start, let's jump into suffering and the search for meaning.
Okay. Sounds good.
We'll start with Hymn of the Men Underground from the brothers Karamazov.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
It is. We meet Dmitry Karamazov.
Wrongly convicted.
Right, wrongly convicted of killing his father and sent to Siberia for hard labor.
Brutal.
Yeah, talk about a tough situation. But here's the thing.
He finds himself?
Yeah, it's like this horrible situation leads to self-discovery.
It's like he's forced to confront himself, you know?
Okay, so is Dostoevsky saying that suffering is necessary for growth?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't think he's glorifying suffering, but he definitely sees its power to transform.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Like Dmitri says, one may thaw and revive a frozen heart in that convent.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
Right. Even in the darkest places, there's potential for connection and empathy.
So it's not just about enduring suffering, it's about finding something in it.
Exactly. And for Dmitri, that something is wrapped up in his struggle with faith.
Oh, right. He's surrounded by different viewpoints on religion.
Yeah, you've got Ivan with his idea of God, and then Rakitin, who's totally atheist.
And Dimitri's caught in the middle.
Right. He's asking, what should I be underground there without God?
So it's like he needs something to hold on to in that darkness.
Faith becomes a lifeline for him.
Now, Dostoevsky really puts his characters through the ringer.
No kidding.
Our next excerpt is Reprieve and Execution from The Idiot.
Ooh, this one's intense.
Yeah, it's about facing death. It comes straight from Dostoevsky's own brush with execution. It's a story about a man condemned to death who gets a last-minute reprieve.
So he's about to die, and then
Suddenly he's not.
Must be a total mind trip.
Totally. And Dostoevsky's description of the condemned man's final moments is so vivid.
Oh, yeah, you can feel the terror.
Right. You can feel the clock ticking down.
Yeah.
He's noticing every detail, the church roof, the sun's rays.
It's like time slows down.
Exactly. And it's so interesting to contrast that with Dimitri's fear.
Right. One is clinging to life. The other's afraid of losing something he found through suffering.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
And the condemned man, he's driven by this overwhelming desire to just get it over with.
He said that this idea turned to such a fury at last that he longed to be shot quietly.
Wow.
Right. He'd rather face death than endure the waiting.
It makes you think about how we value time.
Totally. So we've gone deep into suffering now. Let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We'll look at redemption and forgiveness with The Onion from the brothers Karamazov.
The Onion?
Yeah, it's a parable told by Grushenka.
Oh, I love that story.
Me too. It's so simple but profound.
And Grushenka herself, she's on this path to redemption.
Right, thanks to Alyosha's kindness.
It shows that even people who seem lost can find their way back.
Okay, so tell me about this onion. What's its significance?
So the story's about this wicked woman who dies and goes to hell,
Okay.
but she gets a chance to be pulled up to heaven by an angel.
And it's all because of an onion.
Yeah, she once gave an onion to a beggar.
Wow. So even a small act of kindness can make a difference.
Exactly. But here's the twist. The woman, she clings to her wickedness,
Oh, no.
and she loses her chance at salvation. And Grushenka, she sees herself in this story.
Oh, wow.
She says, "So that's the story, Alyosha. I know it by heart, for I am that wicked woman myself."
So it's not just about the possibility of redemption, it's about the choices we make.
Right, we have the power to choose our path even in hell.
Okay, so from onions and hell, let's move to the last judgment, from crime and punishment.
All right, I'm ready.
We meet Marmeladov, a man completely beaten down by life.
A truly tragic figure.
He drowns his sorrows in alcohol, but he still loves his family.
Yeah, his wife, Katerina Ivanovna, and his daughter, Sonia. They're trying so hard.
It's heartbreaking, and Marmeladov, he's almost seeking punishment. Yeah, it's like he wants to be seen, understood. He cries out, "Crucify me, O judge, crucify me, but pity me."
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and his faith is interesting despite everything he believes in a merciful God.
Yeah, he says, "And he will forgive my Sonia. He will forgive, I know it."
It's like his faith is his only solace.
It gives him hope, even when he feels utterly lost.
So maybe it's not about avoiding consequences, but finding grace in the midst of them.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, and that actually leads perfectly into our next excerpt, which deals directly with faith and doubt.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Let's get into it then. So we're diving into this excerpt that deals with faith and doubt.
Yeah, it's called The Crucifixion from the Idiot, and it's pretty powerful.
And it's connected to a painting, right?
Right. Hans Holbein the Younger, the body of the dead Christ in the tomb.
Okay, so we're talking art and Dostoyevsky.
Exactly. This painting really messed with Dostoyevsky, like deeply affected him.
You know, I can kind of understand that art can be so powerful.
Yeah, totally. And he even wrote about it in the foreword, like how disturbed he was by the painting.
So what is it about this painting that's so unsettling?
Well, it's incredibly graphic and realistic. It shows Christ's body after the crucifixion, and like it's brutal. There's no holding back.
Oh, wow.
It's not like those pretty pictures of Christ we usually see, you know. This is death, real death.
And that ties into Dostoyevsky's exploration of faith.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. By showing Christ's suffering in such a raw way, he's challenging those traditional ideas of resurrection and triumph over death.
I see what you mean. It's like he's making us confront the reality of death.
Exactly. He's asking if even Christ, who performed miracles and supposedly conquered death, could die like this. What hope is there for the rest of us?
It's a heavy question.
It is. And, you know, in the excerpt, he even describes nature as this immense, merciless, dumb beast.
Wow, that's bleak.
Right. It's like he's saying that even Christ, even someone divine, is ultimately crushed by these forces.
So it's not just a personal struggle with faith. It's like a struggle with existence itself.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's about those big existential questions, the ones that have always haunted humanity.
So we've talked about suffering, redemption, and now faith and doubt. What stands out to you as we kind of wrap things up?
I think what really gets me is how Dostoyevsky connects everything. Suffering leads to growth. That search for meaning leads to the possibility of redemption. And all of this happens in the context of faith and doubt, this constant back and forth.
It's like he's saying life is messy.
Exactly. It's not black and white. It's complicated.
But even in the darkness, there's still hope.
Yeah, definitely. There's always potential for transformation and finding meaning, even when things are rough.
Well said. So after this deep dive, how are you feeling about these big themes? Do they resonate with you?
They definitely do. I think Dostoyevsky is one of those writers who stays with you long after you've finished reading him.
I agree. His work is so thought-provoking, and it definitely makes you question things in a good way.
Totally. And I think that's the point.
Huh.
He's not giving us answers. He's inviting us to keep searching, to keep exploring these big questions.
And on that note, we'll leave you to continue your own exploration of Dostoyevsky's world. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep. It's amazing how he pulls it all together, right? Like suffering leading to growth and redemption popping up in unexpected places, and then this whole dance between faith and doubt. Makes you want to dive back into his books.
Yeah, definitely. Dostoyevsky really sticks with you. He leaves you with more questions than answers, which I think is a good thing.
I agree. It keeps you thinking. And you know what's crazy? His work still feels so relevant today.
Totally. I mean, he was writing in 19th century Russia, but those big questions about suffering, redemption, and faith, they're still relevant. We still deal with those things.
Yeah, it's like he understood something fundamental about being human, something that goes beyond time and place.
Right. It doesn't matter when or where you live, we all go through loss, searching for meaning and questioning what we believe.
He really captures that. It's like he's holding up this mirror to humanity.
Yeah, showing us the good and the bad, the struggles and the potential.
And even in the darkest parts, he shows that there's still hope, still a chance for change and growth.
Absolutely. That's what makes his work so powerful. It reminds us that even when things are tough, we can still find meaning. We can still connect with each other.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking, what can we learn from all this? How can these ideas about suffering, redemption, and faith help us in our own lives?
That's a good question. Maybe it's about accepting that life is complicated. It's not always easy or straightforward.
Yeah, and maybe it's about being more compassionate, understanding that everyone's going through something.
Definitely. And remembering that everyone deserves kindness, no matter what their situation is.
And maybe it's about never stopping asking those big questions, even when the answers are hard to find.
Yeah. Keep searching, keep exploring. That's where the real growth happens.
Well said. So we'll leave you with that. Keep exploring Dostoyevsky's work. Keep asking those big questions. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep. Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into Dostoyevsky. You guys sent in some really interesting excerpts from The Gospel in Dostoyevsky by Ernest Gordon.
Go on.
Yeah, the Miracle on the River Kwai guy.
Right.
So we want to look at how Gordon uses his own experiences, to understand the themes of faith and freedom in Dostoyevsky's work. What do you think?
Well, it adds a really unique layer to Dostoyevsky, right? It becomes less about like just an academic study and more about like a shared struggle.
Absolutely. It's like he's not just analyzing Dostoevsky from afar, but actually wrestling with those same questions about faith alongside him.
Yeah.
And to really get that struggle, we have to picture the world Dostoevsky was living in. I mean, think about it. 19th century Russia, secularism on the rise, Enlightenment philosophies challenging traditional Christian beliefs.
It was a tumultuous time, for sure. And you see that reflected in Dostoevsky's own life. Like he starts with this devout upbringing,
Right.
then explores socialist and atheist ideas.
Right.
And then ultimately he returns to Christianity. But it's not this simple return, It's a Christianity forged in the fires of his own doubt and questioning.
So it's like his work becomes this battleground for the biggest questions about faith.
Right, exactly. And maybe nowhere is this more evident than in The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor. You familiar with that one?
Oh, from the brothers Karamazov, right?
Yeah. A story within a story told by Ivan Karamazov. He's like the embodiment of that skeptical, rationalist mindset.
Yeah.
And get this in the story. The Grand Inquisitor actually confronts Jesus, like face to face.
Okay, now that's intense. So he's not just questioning God, he's straight up challenging him.
He is. He's basically saying, you gave humanity freedom, but it's too much for them. They can't handle it.
Wow. So it's almost like he's trying to protect people from themselves.
That's the genius of Dostoevsky, right? He doesn't give us easy answers. He makes us question whether the Inquisitor is a villain or, in a twisted way, a savior.
Right. Is he wrong, though? I mean, do we really want true freedom if it means facing all that uncertainty and doubt?
That's the dilemma. And what makes it even more fascinating is how Gordon connects the Inquisitor's actions to Ivan's own rebellion against God.
Oh, interesting.
They're both choosing, in a way, an illusion of freedom, control, certainty, whatever it may be. They're choosing that over, genuine faith with all its messiness.
That is a really powerful connection. So this isn't just a philosophical debate then. Dostoevsky is getting at what it means to be human, the choices we make, the consequences that come from those choices.
Absolutely. And for Dostoevsky, those consequences go way deeper than just breaking rules. Sin, for him, is this act of rebellion, an attempt to steal God's power, like trying to decide for ourselves what's right and wrong,
Makes me think of that quote, what is hell? I think it is the suffering of being unable to love. Something like that.
Chilling, right.
It's heavy.
It gets to the core of what Dostoevsky believed about sin. It's not just about our actions, but about the state of our hearts. Living without God, it's like being trapped in this spiritual isolation, this like profound lovelessness that becomes its own kind of hell.
But even with all that darkness, Dostoevsky does give us glimpses of a different kind of freedom, right? That creative freedom that Gordon talks about, the freedom that comes from grace.
Exactly. Think of Sonia in Crime and Punishment. She embodies this pure, self-sacrificing love. And it's that love that ultimately leads Raskolnikov toward redemption. It's not an easy road, but it is a road illuminated by, well, by grace.
So Dostoevsky is kind of contrasting these two types of freedom, right? There's the destructive kind born out of rebellion and isolation, and then there's this liberating freedom rooted in love that points us towards something, well, something bigger than ourselves.
You've got it. It's not a simple good versus evil kind of thing. It's messy and nuanced like real life. It's about struggling to understand faith, freedom, and what happens when we choose one path over another.
And it's within that struggle that Dostoevsky introduces us to, like his free characters. They're these individuals who wrestle with these questions in their own unique ways.
They're almost like living embodiments of the choices we face. There's the underground man, for example. He's all about asserting his individuality, even if it's absurd or self-destructive.
Yeah, like he takes that individualistic impulse to the extreme.
Totally. But then you have characters like Prince Mishkin from The Idiot and Alyosha from the Brothers Karamazov.
Right.
They represent a totally different path, one grounded in compassion and humility, a willingness to embrace suffering as a way to grow spiritually. Mishkin, he's almost Christ-like in his innocence. He rejects his privileged life and chooses to serve others, even if it means being ridiculed.
And Alyosha, he's on this constant journey of learning, questioning, trying to live a life of love and compassion, even when tragedy strikes. So you have all these characters embodying different responses to freedom, but they all seem to point towards a deeper truth. Like, true freedom isn't about rebelling or asserting yourself. It's about surrendering, about embracing the qualities that connect us to something larger than ourselves.
That's a key insight, for sure. And it's something Dostoevsky himself lived through. Imprisonment, exile, these experiences shaped his understanding of suffering and its power to transform us.
And it's those experiences, coupled with his deep faith, that make his work so compelling even centuries later. He doesn't shy away from the dark side of humanity, but he always points us toward the light, even if that light shines brightest in the midst of suffering.
And that's where Ernest Gordon comes in, right? He went through his own profound suffering as a prisoner of war.
Yeah.
So he brings this unique understanding to Dostoevsky's work. He recognizes that struggle, the depth of those insights. He gets it.
It's like Gordon is this bridge between Dostoevsky's world and our own. He helps us see that these aren't just philosophical debates. They're about the fundamental questions we all grapple with. The meaning of suffering, the nature of freedom, the search for something that transcends our everyday existence.
It's about facing the darkness, both within ourselves and in the world, but it's also about holding on to hope, the possibility of redemption, the power of love, the enduring beauty of creation.
And that's what makes Dostoevsky's work so timeless, that interplay of darkness and light, despair and hope. So as we continue this deep dive, let's keep those contrasting forces in mind. How does Dostoevsky, through Gordon's perspective, help us navigate this crazy thing called life? How do his characters, with all their flaws and contradictions, help us find meaning and purpose?
Those are the questions worth pondering. And as we dig deeper into Gordon's analysis, you might be surprised just how personal and relevant these centuries-old texts can be. It's amazing how Dostoevsky doesn't just tell us about suffering, he throws us right into it with his characters.
Right into the fire.
Exactly. Like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. I mean, murder, that's heavy stuff. But it's that very act that sets him on this path of, well, spiritual awakening.
It's like he had to hit rock bottom, you know,
Right.
to even glimpse the possibility of light, the suffering itself. It's like it creates the space for something new to emerge.
Yeah, the guilt, the paranoia, the mental torture he goes through after the murder, that's what forces him to confront what he's actually done.
And we can't forget Sonia in all of this. She's just radiating this radical compassion, even after everything she's been through, the abuse, being marginalized by society.
Dostoevsky almost seems to be saying that true understanding, true love, can be found in the most unexpected places, among those who have suffered the most.
Right. It's like they have this connection to the human condition that, well, that those in power often just don't get.
Exactly.
It makes me think of Prince Mishkin from The Idiot. He's another one of those characters who embodies this radical love, even though no one seems to understand him.
Mishkin. He's almost too good to be true, isn't he? That childlike innocence, seeing the good in everyone, refusing to judge. But that very innocence, it becomes a reason for people to make fun of him.
But in a way, it's that refusal to play by society's rules, that refusal to give in to cynicism or despair. It's what makes him so powerful. He embodies that, well, that Christian ideal of unconditional love,
Yeah.
even when it's met with rejection.
And that clearly resonated with Dostoevsky on a personal level. He wasn't some saint, you know. He was a man of passion, anger, jealousy, even violence sometimes. But he also had this deep longing for spiritual truth, this wrestling match with the idea of redemption.
So it's not about pretending we don't have those darker impulses, right? Our capacity for doing wrong. It's about recognizing that potential for change, for growth,
Yep.
even when we're struggling.
Exactly. And that transformation, it often comes with a cost. Dostoevsky doesn't offer easy answers. His characters go through so much pain, sacrifice, even humiliation to reach that place of understanding.
But when they get there, there's this feeling of triumph, like they've finally broken free. Not by escaping the world, but by embracing the whole spectrum of human experience, the darkness and the light.
It's a powerful message for anyone who's, well, who's just trying to figure things out. Dostoevsky seems to be saying, embrace the chaos, confront the pain. That's where you might find the meaning you're looking for.
And that message is so relevant today, isn't it? I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with news of violence, suffering, division. It's easy to get caught up in all the negativity.
Dostoevsky reminds us that even in the middle of all that chaos, even when we feel broken, there's still that possibility of redemption. The power of love to heal, to change things, to bridge those divides. That's his message.
And speaking of powerful messages, I think it's time we bring Ernest Gordon back into the mix. His story as a prisoner of war during World War II, it gives us such a unique lens to look at Dostoevsky through, don't you think?
Absolutely. Gordon's story, it's both terrifying and incredibly inspiring. Captured by the Japanese in '42, and then more than 3 years of, starvation, beatings, forced labor on the Burma Railway. It's hard to even imagine.
It's almost beyond comprehension.
It is.
And yet, in the midst of that darkness, he has this profound spiritual awakening, a moment of grace, as he describes it, like suddenly realizing that even in the darkest places imaginable, God is present.
That's what makes his take on Dostoevsky so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just an academic, right? He's someone who has walked through fire and come out on the other side with this deep understanding of the human spirit, its resilience, its capacity for hope, the transformative power of faith.
And that resonates so deeply with Dostoevsky's own journey, both of them facing immense suffering, wrestling with doubt and despair, and ultimately finding solace and meaning in their faith. It's like Gordon was meant to be our guide through Dostoevsky's world.
And that's where his encounter with the legend of the Grand Inquisitor comes in. He reads it as a prisoner, and it's like a light bulb going off. He sees the parallels between Ivan's rebellion against God and his own struggles with faith. That temptation to take the easy road, to reject the burden of freedom for the comfort of security.
It's like Dostoevsky was speaking directly to him, providing this framework for understanding the relationship between faith, doubt, and our human desire for both freedom and security.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the intellectual stuff, the ideas themselves. It was the raw emotion of Dostoevsky's writing. His ability to capture the experience of suffering, the darkest parts of the human heart, and still point toward the possibility of redemption.
That's what makes Dostoevsky so timeless, so universal. He speaks to something deep within us, something that goes beyond time and culture, those fundamental questions of being human, the meaning of suffering, the search for purpose, the longing for connection and love.
And Gordon, through his own experiences, helps us tap into those deeper layers of meaning. He shows us that Dostoevsky isn't just for scholars, He's for anyone who's ever wrestled with doubt, faced hardship, or yearned for something more.
So what does Gordon's story, combined with Dostoevsky's insights, tell us about finding meaning in suffering? Is it just about enduring hardship and coming out stronger?
It's definitely not about seeking out suffering or glorifying it. But as we see with characters like Raskolnikov and Mishkin, suffering can be this catalyst for profound change. It strips away our illusions, forces us to confront our own mortality, and that can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And like with Sonia, suffering can be a source of empathy and compassion. It can open us up to the pain of others and inspire us to act with more love and kindness.
But that doesn't mean it's easy to find meaning in suffering. It takes courage, faith, and a willingness to be vulnerable, to confront the darkness within and outside of ourselves without losing sight of the light.
It's a journey filled with doubt, despair, even anger at times. But Dostoevsky and Gordon, they both remind us it's a journey worth taking. That the search for meaning, as difficult as it can be, is, well, it's what makes us human.
It's through that struggle, those moments of darkness and questioning. That's where we discover our capacity for love, for compassion, for forgiveness, and ultimately for finding beauty and meaning even in the most broken places.
People often say Dostoyevsky is dark and depressing, but I think that's missing the point. He doesn't shy away from the realities of suffering, but he always offers this vision of hope, a belief in the power of love to redeem and transform us, and that enduring possibility of spiritual growth, even in the face of immense hardship.
And that vision of hope is, well, it might be even more important today than it was in Dostoevsky's time.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot, exploring the depths of Dostoyevsky's world with Ernest Gordon as our guide.
We've still got more to uncover, though. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll look at some of those surprising moments of joy and light that pop up in Dostoyevsky's work, and consider how his message continues to resonate in our modern world.
You know, it's funny, we often think of Dostoyevsky and it's all doom and gloom, right? Suffering, darkness.
Right.
But there's this joy, this like spiritual ecstasy that you find in his work. It comes out of the struggle somehow.
Yeah, it's not ignoring the darkness. It's like it's deeper because of it.
I was thinking about that scene in The Brothers Karamazov with Alyosha after Elder Zosima dies.
Yeah.
He has that vision almost like a dream. The elder's alive, glowing, and they're sharing this new wine, this incredible gladness.
Oh, it's such a powerful scene. It really shows you how suffering can transform you. Alyosha's grief, the confusion, trying to understand Zosima's death. It all brings him to this moment of pure joy, a joy that spills over into this love for the world, for nature. Like he's seeing everything in a new light.
Yeah, it's like the darkness has cleared his vision or something. He can see the beauty and the wonder that was always there, but maybe hidden, you know?
Dostoevsky seems to be saying that this kind of joy, this connection to something bigger than ourselves, often comes from suffering. Not that we should go looking for pain, but recognizing its potential to change us, to make us understand more, to love more deeply.
So it's not about avoiding the darkness, it's about the paradox, right? True joy, true freedom, it can come from the most unexpected places, even suffering.
Exactly. And that's where Dostoevsky throws down the gauntlet, right? To those Euclidean minds he talks about.
Those folks who think logic is everything.
Yeah, they're missing out on this whole other dimension of experience. Intuition, faith, the heart. These are the places where the real truths are hiding, and you can't find them with logic alone.
That feels really relevant today, don't you think? We're obsessed with data, algorithms, measuring everything, but what about the things you can't measure?
Right.
Emotions, faith, beauty, awe. They're not numbers on a spreadsheet.
Dostoevsky's reminding us to pay attention to those things that don't fit neatly into boxes, the mysteries. They speak to something deeper. He's saying be more aware of the world, but also of what's going on inside you, those moments of doubt, of joy, of questioning. That's where the light shines through.
So not abandoning reason, but recognizing its limits, being open to the mystery, to the possibility of something beyond what we currently understand.
Yes, it's about wonder, being surprised, realizing that the biggest truths might not come from how smart we are, but from humility. Openness, surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
And that brings us back to Ernest Gordon. He really understood the power of those cracks in our lives, those moments when everything falls apart, the suffering, the crisis. That's when we're forced to confront something deeper, something real.
Being a prisoner of war, it stripped everything away for him, all those illusions of control. He saw the raw truth of suffering, his own and everyone around him. And in that darkness, he found light, a strength that came from somewhere outside of him.
And it was that experience, that stripping away, that surrender, that allowed him to really connect with what Dostoyevsky was saying. Even in despair, even when things are truly awful, there's still that chance for redemption, for transformation, for finding meaning in the most surprising ways.
And that message, I think it's more important now than ever. The world feels so divided, right? Ideology, fear, mistrust. It's easy to lose hope. But Dostoevsky, seen through Gordon's eyes, reminds us that even in the chaos, even in the suffering, there's still that chance for healing, for forgiveness, for love.
He reminds us that searching for meaning, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, that's what makes us human. That's where we discover who we really are, what we're capable of.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Dostoevsky's world.
It's been quite a journey, exploring these timeless themes. And we hope you'll keep exploring Dostoyevsky's work on your own. See what you discover. Until next time, keep searching for those cracks where the light gets in.
All right, so Today we're going to be looking at Dostoyevsky.
Okay.
And more specifically,
All right.
we're diving into this excerpt from the foreword of a book called The Gospel in Dostoyevsky, written by Malcolm Muggeridge.
Okay.
And, it's interesting because he starts off by saying that, he initially read Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment as purely a thriller.
Right.
I have to admit that's kind of how I approached it at first, too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But then he talks about how when he encountered some of Dostoyevsky's other works, like the Brothers Karamazov, he realized there was like this whole other layer, this philosophical and spiritual depth.
It's like he cracked a code or something. Like suddenly these stories become these profound explorations of like the human condition.
Like human condition, exactly.
Yeah.
And Muggeridge argues that Dostoyevsky had this really uncanny ability to kind of see right into the heart of things, to understand like man's relationship with his creator. He even goes so far as to call him a prophetic voice.
Wow.
Someone whose insights illuminate the future.
Really?
I don't know about predicting the future.
Right.
But I think Dostoyevsky definitely tapped into something timeless.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And one of the core themes that Muggeridge identifies in his writing is this battle between good and evil.
Right.
Which plays out so vividly in his characters.
Yes.
It's not just theoretical, It's about the choices they make, the consequences they face.
Right.
The struggles within themselves.
Yeah, and what makes it even more compelling, I think, is that Dostoyevsky himself wasn't just observing the struggle from afar.
Yeah.
He was living it.
Oh, wow.
He went through these really intense periods of doubt and spiritual searching before eventually finding faith.
And he actually refers to that as
the hellfire of doubt. Yeah.
The hellfire of doubt.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty powerful.
It is powerful. And, I think that adds so much depth to his work.
Absolutely.
You can just feel the weight of his own experience.
Yeah.
In the way he portrays his characters grappling with these questions.
Totally.
And here's where I think Dostoyevsky throws in a real curveball.
Okay.
He believed that embracing suffering was actually key to redemption.
Oh, wow. That's pretty radical. Especially in our world today, where we're constantly told to seek happiness and avoid pain at all costs.
It's like the opposite message.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
But Dostoyevsky kind of flips the script on us.
He does.
He says maybe by running from suffering, we're missing out on something crucial to our growth and our understanding of ourselves.
Makes you wonder, are we so busy chasing happiness that we've lost sight of the potential value of suffering?
That's a great question.
It
is. What do you think?
I think there's definitely something to that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about times in your own life when you've faced hardship.
Have those experiences led to some kind of personal growth or deeper understanding?
For sure.
Yeah. So Dostoyevsky definitely believed that by confronting suffering head on, we could find a different kind of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, I think it's helpful to talk about his encounter with Holbein the Younger's painting, Christ taken down from the cross.
This is a powerful story.
It is.
He was so captivated by this painting that he went out of his way to see it. And this was rare for him. He typically avoided museums.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is that his reaction to the painting was the complete opposite of his wife Anna's.
Right.
Yeah.
She was horrified.
Totally horrified.
By the image.
Yeah, she described Christ's body as like emaciated,
right,
visible bones and ribs.
Wow.
Wounds that were swollen and blue.
Oh, gosh.
Like a body on the verge of decay, which was a far cry from how Christ was usually depicted.
Yeah, those more idealized images.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's precisely what disturbed her.
Right. But Dostoyevsky was captivated.
Wow.
He saw the power in that rawness, in the fact that Christ's body was portrayed as subject to the same processes of decay as any other human body.
Yeah.
And for him, it made Christ's sacrifice that much more real and meaningful.
It's like he was saying that if Christ hadn't fully embraced our human condition, even in death,
right,
then the whole idea of redemption loses its power.
I think that's a really profound theological point.
Yeah.
It suggests that when God became man in the person of Jesus,
it
wasn't just a symbolic gesture.
Right.
It was a complete embodiment of our humanity, including our mortality.
Wow. That's heavy stuff.
It is, yeah.
So it's like Dostoevsky saw this painting
Uh-huh.
as this reminder that Christ really walked among us,
Yeah.
experiencing like the full spectrum of human existence.
Exactly.
The joys, the sorrows, the vulnerabilities,
Right.
and ultimately death itself.
And that message, I think, of shared humanity resonates far beyond just theology.
It speaks to our universal experience of suffering and loss. Yeah, and this persistent hope for something more.
Mm.
In a way, you could even say that Dostoevsky, by delving into these like dark and difficult themes, was kind of a prophet.
Well, Muggeridge actually uses that exact word.
Does he?
Prophetic. To describe him. He says that Dostoevsky's insights foreshadowed a lot of the challenges
Oh, wow.
and complexities that we face in the modern world.
It's amazing how relevant his work still feels today.
It really is.
Even though he was writing in 19th century Russia,
Yeah.
it's like he had this ability to see the trajectory of human history
Yeah.
and the struggles that were ahead.
So what kind of future did he envision then?
Oh,
Did he offer any solutions to these struggles?
he did in a way.
Okay.
He believed in this future of universal brotherhood, but not one that was achieved through political revolutions or social engineering or anything like that.
Right.
He saw it as a future that was brought about by what he called Christian enlightenment.
Christian enlightenment.
Yeah.
That's an interesting phrase.
It is.
I'm not sure I've heard that before.
Yeah, it seems to suggest a different path to unity
Yeah.
than the ones we usually hear about.
What do you think he meant by that?
Well, it's a complex concept for sure,
Right.
but it seems to point towards like a way of being in the world
Okay.
that's rooted in compassion and empathy
Okay.
and this deep recognition of our shared humanity stemming from a profound understanding of Christian principles.
So it's not just about changing systems or structures,
Right.
but it's more about like a fundamental shift in our hearts and minds,
Exactly.
like a transformation of the soul.
Yeah,
That seems like a pretty radical idea,
it is.
especially in a world that's so focused on external solutions to our problems.
It is. And I think that's part of what makes Dostoevsky so compelling.
Yeah.
He challenges us to look inward, to grapple with these big questions about morality and faith and the meaning of life.
He doesn't really offer any easy answers,
No.
but he forces us to confront the complexities of our own nature and our relationship with something larger than ourselves.
Totally. And you know, something else that Muggeridge mentions is the fact that Dostoevsky's works continued to circulate even in Soviet Russia,
Oh, wow.
the first officially atheist state, which I think is really interesting. It's like his ideas had this enduring power
Yeah.
that even a regime hostile to religion couldn't suppress.
It really speaks to the universality of his themes.
It does.
He wasn't just writing for a Christian audience.
Right.
He was exploring these fundamental questions about good and evil, suffering and redemption
Exactly.
that resonate across cultures and belief systems.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what impact his work might have
Yeah.
on someone who isn't familiar with Christianity, or
Right.
maybe even someone who's skeptical of religion altogether.
Could his exploration of these big questions still speak to them?
Yeah, I think it absolutely could. Because after all, these are universal human experiences.
Yeah.
We all grapple with questions of right and wrong.
Right.
We all experience suffering and loss.
For sure.
We all long for meaning and purpose.
Right.
So Dostoevsky's work might even provide a new lens through which to view those experiences
Right.
and kind of prompt this deeper level of reflection and questioning.
It's funny because earlier we were talking about how Dostoevsky's work initially hooked Muggeridge as pure entertainment, like a thriller.
Yeah.
But then there's this whole other layer of meaning
Right.
that unfolds.
And that's the beauty of great literature, isn't it?
It is.
It can work on these multiple levels. It can draw you in with a compelling story,
Right.
but it can also leave you pondering these profound questions
Yeah.
long after you've finished reading.
Speaking of profound questions,
Yeah.
Dostoevsky explores this concept in The Brothers Karamazov that I find really fascinating.
Okay.
The idea of beauty as a battleground.
Yep.
There's this quote from Dmitry Karamazov where he says, "Beauty is not only a terrible thing, it is also a mysterious thing. There God and the devil strive for mastery, and the battleground is the heart of men."
That's a good one.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Dostoyevsky quotes.
Yeah,
It's so evocative.
it is.
It suggests that beauty isn't just something pleasurable to experience.
Right.
It's this powerful force that can
Right.
be both alluring and dangerous.
I love that he uses the word battleground.
Yeah,
It suggests that beauty can be a site of conflict,
right.
a place where we're constantly tempted and challenged.
Yeah, it makes you think about all the ways that beauty can be used for
Yeah.
both good and evil.
For sure, like art music,
Yeah,
even nature.
totally.
These things can inspire us and uplift us, connect us to something larger than ourselves,
Right?
but they can also be used to manipulate us or deceive us
Exactly.
or distract us from what really matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Dostoevsky is suggesting that we have to be discerning. We have to be aware of the potential pitfalls of beauty,
Yeah.
even as we appreciate its power.
And that discernment, that awareness, comes from making choices. Choices about what we value, what we prioritize, what we allow to influence our hearts and minds.
Totally.
Which kind of brings us back to that central conflict
Yeah.
in Dostoevsky's work, that battle between good and evil
Yep.
that plays out within each of us.
And that battle, that struggle,
Yeah.
is ultimately what makes his characters and his work as a whole so compelling.
Yeah.
They reflect our own internal struggles, our own search for meaning and purpose
Yeah.
in a world that often feels chaotic and confusing.
You know, it's interesting because for someone who grappled with so much darkness and suffering in his own life,
Right.
Dostoevsky seemed to have this surprising amount of hope.
He did.
Ah.
It's inspiring.
He believed in the possibility of redemption, of transformation,
Yeah.
of a future where humanity could find unity and peace.
Right.
And not through force or coercion,
Exactly.
but through a deeper understanding of our shared humanity.
Yeah, and that vision, I think, is what continues to draw readers to his work even today.
It makes sense.
He doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions,
Right.
but he invites us to engage in a dialogue
Mm.
with some of the most profound questions that humanity has ever grappled with.
It's like he's saying, hey, life is messy and complicated,
Yeah,
but let's dive in together and try to make sense of it all.
exactly. And that's a journey that I think is worth taking, even if it's challenging, even if it's uncomfortable at times.
I agree.
Because in the process of wrestling with these big questions, we might just discover something really profound about ourselves and the world around us.
Well, before we wrap up our deep dive into Dostoevsky art and the human condition,
Okay.
Muggeridge poses this really interesting question.
Yep.
He asks, supposing one were asked to name a book calculated to give an unbeliever today a clear notion of what Christianity is about, could one hope to do much better than the brothers Karamazov?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
It is.
What do you think?
I think The Brothers Karamazov is a complex and challenging read,
Right.
but it's also a really profound exploration of faith and doubt and morality
Yeah.
and the search for meaning.
Urgently.
It really delves into the heart of Christian thought
Hmm.
and grapples with some of the most difficult questions about human existence.
So even though Dostoevsky was writing over a century ago,
Right?
his work still has the power to spark conversations and challenge our assumptions,
Absolutely.
and maybe even lead us down a path of spiritual discovery.
I think so.
Well, we covered a lot today.
We did.
It's amazing how a single excerpt from a foreword can spark so many different ideas.
It really is.
So I'm curious what really stuck with you from this whole deep dive into Dostoevsky.
That's a good question. I think for me, it's this idea of suffering as a pathway to something deeper.
Okay.
It's a concept that's often rejected in our modern world,
Yeah.
where we're all about pursuing comfort and happiness.
Right. Right.
But Dostoevsky seems to be suggesting that maybe by trying to avoid suffering at all costs, we're missing out on something crucial to what it means to be human.
I was thinking about that too when you're talking. You know, I remember reading Notes from Underground for the first time and just being so struck by how dark and intense it was.
It's almost suffocating.
Yeah, it is.
But there's this strange beauty to it, too.
There is.
Yeah.
It's like he's forcing us to confront the parts of ourselves that we'd rather ignore.
Exactly.
And maybe that's where the real growth happens,
I think so.
in those uncomfortable spaces.
Yeah. Dostoevsky doesn't shy away from the darkness at all.
No, he doesn't.
He embraces it.
Yeah, and I think through that embrace, he seems to find a glimmer of hope, a possibility of redemption.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I was also thinking about his reaction to the Holbein painting.
Oh, yeah.
To be so moved by the image of Christ's decaying body.
Uh-huh.
To see it as a testament to his humanity and the depth of his sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a perspective that you don't encounter every day.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And I think it really challenges our often very sanitized view of faith.
I think so, too.
It reminds us that true faith isn't about avoiding the messy and uncomfortable parts of life.
Yeah.
It's about embracing them and trying to find meaning in them and ultimately transcending them.
You know, for someone who's just starting to explore Dostoyevsky,
okay,
where would you recommend they begin?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're up for a challenge, I'd say The Brothers Karamazov.
Okay.
But it's not a light read.
It's not.
No, it's dense and complex.
Yeah.
It'll definitely spark some intense philosophical and spiritual wrestling matches in your mind.
I can definitely vouch for that.
But it's so worth it.
It is.
It's one of those books that really stays with you long after you finish reading it.
Right.
And it just keeps prompting you to ask those big questions about life and faith and the human condition.
And for our listeners who are intrigued by Muggeridge's perspective,
okay,
we'll include a link to the full text of the Gospel and Dostoevsky in the show notes.
Yeah, that's a great resource.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating read.
It is.
And it provides a lot more context for understanding Dostoevsky and his work.
Totally.
So there you have it.
That's it.
Our deep dive into Dostoevsky art faith and the complexities of the human experience.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about how a master storyteller like Dostoevsky used his novels to grapple with these timeless questions of good and evil, suffering and redemption, and how painting Holbein's Christ taken down from the cross profoundly impacted Dostoevsky's understanding of Christ's sacrifice.
Powerful stuff.
It is powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you continue exploring Dostoevsky's works, or even just reflecting on your own life, I'll leave you with this thought.
All right.
What if the very things we try so hard to avoid, the pain, the loss, the suffering, are actually the keys to unlocking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into Dostoyevsky today, specifically the brothers Karamazov. And we're going to be focusing on Elder Zosima.
Zosima?
You shared some pretty thought-provoking excerpts.
Oh, I did.
And I'm excited to kind of unpack this whole story of this guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because he tells Zosima's story like within the larger story of the book, you know?
Yeah.
So you get like these layers.
Right.
We're hearing about Zosima through his own words, basically.
It's like a deep dive within a deep dive.
Exactly.
Kind of, right.
Yeah.
And so that makes it even more interesting, I think, to explore how his experiences like shaped how he saw the world. So starting with his childhood, it's kind of idyllic, right? Loving family, strong sense of faith.
I think that it's important to note that his early life is really like infused with Russian Orthodoxy, which really emphasizes this idea of active repentance, right? So it's not enough to just like feel bad about something. You have to actually take steps to change your behavior and make amends. That becomes really, really important later in Zosima's life.
That's really helpful context. Thanks for pointing that out. So within this idyllic setting, we have his brother, Markle, right?
Markle.
Who plays a pretty crucial role. He has this huge transformation on his deathbed.
Yes.
And embraces this idea that everyone is really responsible to all men, and for everything. Like, whoa, heavy stuff for a kid, right?
And that idea of interconnectedness really does become a cornerstone of Zosima's philosophy.
Right.
It starts there
at
his brother's bedside. And that's also where Markle introduces him to the story of Job.
From the Bible.
Yeah.
And that story really seems to make an impact on young Zosima. But how does this story of suffering and faith foreshadow Zosima's own life?
Well, I think, you know, Job's unwavering faith in the face of unimaginable loss, like plants these seeds of wonder and contemplation in Zosima, you know?
Yeah.
It kind of sets the stage for his own trials and his eventual embrace of this life dedicated to faith.
I see the connection there. It's like Dostoyevsky's giving us these little hints about where Zosima's life is going to go through these early influences.
Subtle, but it's there.
But then things take a turn, right? We jump to Zosima as this young officer, And he is so different from the pious child we saw earlier.
Yeah.
He even describes himself as cruel, absurd, almost savage.
Right. It's like this idyllic childhood makes his fall even greater in a way, right?
Yeah.
He gets caught up in this reckless lifestyle of the military. He embraces the very things that he rejected as a child.
Yeah.
And that contrast is crucial, I think. It shows how complex human nature is. Even someone with a strong moral background can stray.
It makes me wonder if Dostoyevsky is drawing some parallels here, maybe connecting Zosima's struggles with his own personal demons. I mean, he spent time in prison, right, and grappled with faith and punishment and all that.
You know, it's interesting. Dostoyevsky's own experiences definitely inform his writing. And it's very possible that he's weaving those themes of guilt and redemption in the search for meaning into Zosima's journey.
And then we have the turning point. The duel.
Wow, the duel.
It's interesting that the reason behind it is so pointless.
Yeah.
Jealousy over a woman who's already engaged.
Talk about a bruised ego.
Right.
Really?
Like, come on.
It emphasizes how far he's fallen, from the ideals of his childhood. He's totally consumed by jealousy, pride, this need for revenge. He insults his rival, challenges him to a duel. It's all fueled by ego.
Yeah, it's like he's the opposite of everything his brother Markel represented, right?
Yes.
But then something changes the night before the duel. He beats his servant Afanasy brutally. But in the quiet of the morning, the weight of what he did really hits him.
I think that moment is really key, It's seeing Afanasy standing there, taking the blows without resisting. That awakens Zosima's conscience. He finally sees Afanasy as a human being.
Yeah, it's like the violence just jolts him back to reality, to those values he learned as a child.
It does.
But it's interesting that it takes something so brutal for him to have this realization.
Yeah.
I mean, is it real remorse or is it just fear of what's going to happen to him?
That is a great question. And it gets to the heart of how complicated his transformation is. Is it all guilt? Or is there a genuine recognition that he's done wrong?
Yeah.
It's something Dostoyevsky leaves open.
Yeah.
But it definitely sets the stage for what Zosima does next.
And what he does next is pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
He begs Afanasy for forgiveness, humbles himself in front of this guy that he wronged. He goes to the duel but throws his pistol away and chooses to apologize publicly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's important to remember the context of that apology.
Oh.
Dueling was like a huge part of their culture back then.
Oh, yeah.
A mark of honor.
Right.
And courage. For Zosima to reject that, to be vulnerable, to embrace humility, it went against everything that society expected.
It was radical.
Totally radical.
And that act of defiance leads to something pretty unexpected, too. Instead of everyone rejecting him, people are kind of drawn to his sincerity, his remorse, the fact that he's breaking free from what society says he should do. It resonates with people.
Yes. His public repentance opens the door to these deeper conversations, People are interested in what he has to say about responsibility, about how we're all connected.
But it also attracts the attention of one person in particular who's carrying a pretty dark secret. And he sees in Zosima like a kindred spirit, someone who understands the weight of transgression.
Interesting.
And that's where we get to the mysterious visitor, right? This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this visitor next time.
I'm ready.
Okay, great. We'll be back after a short break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we have Zosima, this former military officer who, just very publicly repented. And it attracts this visitor. What's the visitor's story? And why is he drawn to Zosima?
Well, this visitor, he's a respected guy in town.
Okay.
Carries a big burden. He tells Zosima that he murdered this woman that he loved.
Oh, wow.
14 years ago, after she turned down his marriage proposal. And to cover it up, he framed an innocent servant.
That's chilling. The fact that he could carry that secret for so long, living this double life, it makes you think about how awful guilt can be, But I wonder about Zosima's reaction.
Yeah.
Shouldn't he be, horrified? Why is he being so forgiving? What about justice?
I think it's surprising at first, yeah. But Zosima really believes that anyone can be redeemed. He's more focused on getting this guy to confess and repent, not condemning him.
Okay, so it's not about punishing the visitor for what he did. It's about helping him find a way forward.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, active repentance, this is what it's all about. Admitting what you did wrong, asking for forgiveness, and making things right.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the visitor's internal struggle? I mean, he's clearly tormented by all this, right?
Oh, absolutely. At first, he didn't feel any remorse at all. He justified it to himself. But years later, after he got married, had kids, The guilt just became too much to bear.
Right.
He's haunted by the life he took, by the fact that his family's happiness is built on a lie.
Classic Dostoyevsky. The mental
Yeah.
torture, the battle between guilt and wanting peace. What role does Zosima play in this?
Zosima becomes super important for this guy's redemption.
Yeah.
He listens without judging, and he guides him using the Bible, encouraging him to face the truth.
So he's putting the visitor's soul, like, above everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
But doesn't that create a problem? What about the innocent servant who was framed? What about the victim's family?
Those are great points.
Mhm.
Dostoevsky really grapples with this in his work.
Hmm.
How do you balance someone's redemption with justice for everyone else?
Right, right.
The visitor confessing doesn't erase what he did, but it's a step towards taking responsibility.
So it seems like Dostoevsky wants us to think about these tough questions, right? About how limited human justice can be and whether forgiveness is possible even for the worst things.
Exactly.
So what happens? Does the visitor confess?
He does. He confesses publicly to the whole town, knowing what might happen to him.
Wow.
And yet, he finds a weird kind of peace in it.
But here's the crazy part. No one believes him. They think he's lost it even with the evidence he gives them. It's so tragic and ironic.
It is, right. He wants redemption through confessing, but no one accepts it. Maybe his truth is just too hard for them to swallow because it forces them to look at their own darkness, too.
Maybe Dostoevsky is saying something about how we understand things, how we tend to label anything we don't get as crazy.
Right, right.
It's easier to dismiss the visitor as insane than to face the truth of his story.
Yeah, it's a good point. His story becomes like a mirror.
Yeah.
It not only shows his own struggles, but also how society can't handle the possibility of both evil and real remorse.
So we have Zosima, who's embraced this radical kind of repentance and forgiveness. And we have the visitor struggling with what he did and finding this hard path towards redemption. Where does that leave Zosima?
Well, that period of his life in the monastery, it's really important.
Okay.
He doesn't just shut himself away from the world and forget what he's learned.
Right.
That experience with the visitor, all the moral stuff it brings up, really shapes how he understands faith and his role in the world.
So Zosima's seen the worst of humanity, how people react to the truth.
He has.
How does that connect to him becoming a monk?
Well, what he does before entering the monastery is key here.
Okay.
He doesn't just go straight there.
Yeah.
He spends time with all sorts of people, putting his brother's ideas about love and responsibility into action.
Wait, hold on. What do you mean? What's he actually doing during this time?
Okay, so there's this one episode that stands out.
Okay.
He's traveling with Father Ansem, raising money for the monastery, and they end up staying with this young peasant. Zosima gets into these deep conversations with the guy about the beauty of creation, how everything's connected.
So he's not just preaching from some high position. He's actually engaging with people where they're at.
Exactly. He's not just talking, he's doing it. And it's during these travels that he really embraces becoming a monk, not to escape the world, but to really dedicate himself to serving others and finding spiritual truth.
So it's not a sudden thing. It's like this natural progression, you know?
Yeah.
Him fulfilling that idea of responsibility for all.
That's a great way to put it. And all his experiences outside the monastery, especially with that visitor, shape how he approaches being a monk and how he interacts with people who come to him for guidance.
Okay, so let's dive into his life in the monastery next time.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've seen how Zosima's life, all those experiences, especially that visitor, kind of led him to the monastery. But is he, like, hiding from the world now, or is it something more?
It's interesting how Dostoevsky shows his monastic life. It's not about shutting himself away. The monastery is more like a place for Zosima to really understand his faith and figure out how to help others.
So he's not like a hermit, right? Just ignoring the world's problems.
Nope, not at all. He keeps having those deep conversations, pushing people to think, even arguing sometimes right inside the monastery. And people are drawn to him because he's so sincere and willing to tackle the tough questions.
It's like that active repentance we talked about. He's always trying to grow, to understand more deeply.
Yeah, exactly. And a big part of that is how his idea of faith changes. It's not just about rules and rituals anymore. It's about seeing something divine in everything around us.
Yeah.
He even tells priests they should use stories, connect with people personally, use the Bible as a guide for life's messiness.
That reminds me of how he talked to that peasant while traveling, using simple things from nature to explain big ideas about faith and how we're all connected. It's like he's saying faith is in the everyday stuff, not just in fancy words or arguments.
You got it. That shows how Zosima shares his wisdom. He's not acting like he knows everything. He's inviting people into a conversation, letting them find their own way.
And he doesn't avoid the hard parts of the Bible either, right? All the stuff that seems contradictory or unfair.
Yeah, and what he says about that is important. He doesn't have easy answers or try to make excuses. He just encourages us to wrestle with it all, find meaning even when it's mysterious. He sees the Bible like a mirror showing all of human experience, not some rule book.
And this brings us back to that idea of being connected, responsible for each other. Even as a monk, that's huge for Zosima.
Definitely. It's not just what he says, it's what he does. He listens with compassion, gives advice without judging, makes a space where people feel safe to face their own struggles and find their own redemption.
So after all this, what do you think Dostoyevsky wants us to take away from Zosima's life?
I think it shows how much humans can change, you know. His whole life, with all the good and bad, shows that redemption is possible, even after big mistakes. It reminds us that finding a better life isn't always easy, but the journey itself is where we grow.
It also makes us think about responsibility, forgiveness, how complicated justice is. It pushes us to look beyond simple judgments, to see that we all have both darkness and light inside us.
It's like an invitation to approach the world with an open heart, trying to understand instead of condemn, to see how we're all connected and work towards making the world a kinder place.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Thanks for guiding us through all this. It's really given me a lot to ponder. And to everyone listening, we hope you feel the same. What stands out to you about Zosima? What challenges you? Keep exploring these ideas. Read more Dostoyevsky and find your own meaning in life's complexities. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at two of Dostoyevsky's most famous novels, The Idiot and Crime and Punishment.
Okay.
We're going to be focusing on excerpts from literary analyses of these works.
Sounds good.
So get ready to unravel some pretty complex characters and dive into themes of guilt, shame, faith, and the pursuit of meaning in a world that often feels very chaotic.
Yeah, Dostoyevsky's work is always so rich and layered, you know?
Absolutely.
He really gets to the heart of the human condition.
Let's start with a really intriguing scene from The Idiot.
Okay.
Prince Mishkin's encounter at Nastasya Philippovna's gathering.
Yeah.
We're introduced to Ganya. I think we've talked about him before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who is head over heels for Nastasya Philippovna.
Right.
And he ends up in this fit of jealousy, and he throws money at Mishkin. What do you think Dostoyevsky is trying to tell us about Ganya through this very symbolic act?
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful moment, right? Because it's not just jealousy. It's this kind of deep insecurity, this desperation that Ganya is feeling.
Yeah.
You know, he sees Mishkin, who is completely oblivious to all the romantic tension in the room, as a threat.
Right.
So he throws the money, and it's almost like he's trying to assert dominance, you know, like buy back a sense of control that he feels is slipping away.
It's interesting, though, because I don't think money buys you love in Dostoyevsky's world.
No, definitely not.
It's something deeper and darker.
Right. It reveals more about Ganya's inner turmoil than his actual wealth or power.
Exactly. What I find fascinating about this scene is Mishkin's reaction.
Right.
He doesn't respond with anger or try to retaliate.
Yeah.
He just says, "Oh, how ashamed you will be of what you've done."
It's so unexpected.
I know, right?
It's not what you'd expect from someone who's just been humiliated like that.
How do you interpret those words coming from Mishkin?
Well, I think it speaks to his profound empathy. You know, Mishkin is almost like a Christ-like figure in this novel. He has this incredible capacity for understanding and forgiveness. He sees right through Ganya's anger to that core of shame and self-loathing that's driving his actions.
It's like he's looking into Ganya's soul.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really powerful commentary on how judgment and condemnation often miss the mark, you know?
Wow.
They don't address the true source of a person's suffering.
And then we have Rogojin, who just jumps right in to defend Mishkin.
Oh, yeah. Rogojin. He's a fascinating character.
He is. He calls Mishkin Prince Darling, and he's ready to fight anyone who disrespects him. There's this fierce loyalty in Rogojin's attachment to Mishkin. It's almost possessive.
Yeah. Rogojin is drawn to Mishkin's innocence and purity, qualities that he feels he lacks himself.
Right.
But there's a darkness there, too, you know?
Yeah.
This possessiveness hints at the complexities of their relationship. It's a bit foreshadowing of what's to come.
And then Nastasya Philippovna herself has this really interesting reaction to the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. She's a force of nature.
I know. It's hard to predict what she's going to do.
Right.
She seems intrigued by Mishkin, by his words, and she kisses Nina Alexandrovna's hand and then rushes out of the room.
It's such a bold move.
I know. What do you think's going on beneath the surface there?
Well, Nastasia Filipovna is such a complex character, right?
Yeah.
She's been exploited and objectified, and she's built up these walls around herself to protect herself from further pain.
But she's drawn to Mishkin.
She is. She's drawn to his authenticity, his kindness.
Right.
And I think it throws her off balance.
That kiss, though, it feels very symbolic.
It does. Maybe it's a way of reclaiming power
Mm-hmm.
in a situation where she feels powerless. You know, or maybe it's a way of expressing her own complicated feelings towards Mishkin.
Feel like she doesn't quite understand herself yet.
Yeah. It's one of those moments that leaves you wondering and wanting to know more.
So we have this intricate web of emotions and motivations playing out in this scene.
Right.
And at the center of it all is Mishkin,
Mm-hmm.
this innocent, almost Christ-like figure
Yeah.
who seems to evoke such powerful reactions from those around him.
He's a catalyst.
Yeah.
He exposes their vulnerabilities and forces them to confront their own inner turmoil.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to their souls.
Exactly. And I think this encounter really sets the stage for the intricate relationships and the moral dilemmas that are going to drive the rest of the novel.
It's a testament to Dostoyevsky's genius that he can pack so much meaning into a seemingly simple encounter.
Absolutely. He's a master of psychological realism.
And I think it's also important to remember the social and historical context of this scene, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Dostoevsky was writing in a time of great social upheaval in Russia. There are all these questions about faith and morality and the role of the individual in society.
Yeah. And you can see those themes bubbling beneath the surface of this scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's transition over to Crime and Punishment.
Okay.
We meet Raskolnikov, who is drowning in guilt and paranoia
Yeah.
after committing murder.
It's a very different atmosphere from The Idiot.
Very different.
Yeah.
More claustrophobic and intense.
Right. We're really plunged into Raskolnikov's tormented psyche.
And in his desperation, he visits Sonia Marmeladov,
Yeah.
this young woman who's been forced into prostitution to support her family.
A really tragic figure.
And it's interesting how Dostoevsky juxtaposes these two very different characters.
It is. It's like he's exploring two extremes of the human experience.
Yeah, the descent into darkness with Raskolnikov and this unwavering faith and resilience in Sonia.
Right. And their encounter is going to be pivotal for both of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that in our next part, shall we?
Definitely.
I'm eager to see where this conversation takes us.
Me too. It's always a journey with Dostoevsky.
I know, right? You never know what to expect. When we left off, we were talking about Raskolnikov visiting Sonia Marmeladov
Right.
in her tiny, impoverished room.
It's such a powerful contrast.
Yeah, you know, her physical surroundings are so bleak, so desolate.
Yeah. Shabby wallpaper, sparse furniture.
Yeah, and there's this locked door that
Yeah.
leads to another flat, you know?
You really get a sense of how cramped and suffocating her life is.
Right, but despite all that, she has this aura of goodness and unwavering faith.
It's like Dostoevsky is highlighting this juxtaposition
Yeah,
to show that true worth isn't found in material possessions.
exactly.
It's about inner strength and moral compass.
And Sonia has that in spades, you know?
Absolutely.
She talks to Raskolnikov about her stepmother, Katerina Ivanovna,
Right, Katerina Ivanovna.
who is really struggling mentally.
Yeah, she's not doing well.
And Sonia has so much hope that Raskolnikov can somehow help.
Such desperate hope.
Yeah, but instead of offering comfort, Raskolnikov does something really strange.
What's that?
He starts asking Sonia all these questions
Oh, about...
about her future and the children
hmm
and what would happen to them if she were to get sick.
It's almost cruel, isn't it?
It is, like he's tormenting her.
Yeah, I think it's his guilt, you know?
His guilt.
Yeah, he's projecting his own anxieties onto Sonia.
Huh.
It's as if he's testing her faith and resilience,
I see.
trying to find some justification for his own actions.
It's like he wants to drag her down with him.
Yeah, there's a self-destructive element to his behavior.
Right, like if he can corrupt her purity, then maybe his sin isn't so bad.
That's a really interesting interpretation.
Yeah, it's almost like he needs to see her break to make himself feel better.
Right, it's a way of lessening the burden of his own guilt.
But Sonia, despite her own suffering, fiercely defends Katerina Ivanovna.
She does, with unwavering passion.
Yeah, her belief in righteousness and her faith just shine through.
It's like she can't even comprehend the darkness that Raskolnikov embodies.
Yeah, she's almost childlike in her innocence.
And that innocence is both a strength and a vulnerability.
Right, it protects her in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes her a target.
Exactly. And that's something that Dostoyevsky explores throughout his novels.
And then we have this incredibly powerful scene where Raskolnikov asks Sonia to read the story of Lazarus
Oh, the Lazarus story, yeah.
from the Bible.
Why do you think he asks for that specific story?
I think on some level he's drawn to the idea of resurrection.
Resurrection.
Yeah, he sees himself as spiritually dead, burdened by his crime.
Right.
And maybe he's hoping for a glimmer of hope.
The possibility of redemption?
Exactly. Sonia's hesitant at first,
Yeah, why is that?
I think she understands the profound power of the story. She knows it's not just a story, it's a truth.
A truth that can shake you to your core.
And she's afraid of the emotions it might unleash.
It's a very intimate moment.
Yeah, and the atmosphere is electric. You can feel the tension building as Sonia starts to read.
Her voice trembling at first.
Yeah, but then it gains strength,
And conviction.
as if she's channeling something beyond herself.
It's like she becomes a vessel for the words.
Could you remind us of some of those powerful verses?
Sure, so she reads, Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this?
Wow, those words are so powerful.
They are, and you can feel their weight in the room.
And Sonia continues.
Yeah, she goes on to describe the scene at Lazarus's tomb.
Stone being rolled away.
And then, that incredible moment, Lazarus, come forth.
It's almost as if you're there, witnessing it firsthand.
Right, you're transported to that moment.
The impact on both Sonia and Raskolnikov is undeniable.
It is. It's a pivotal moment for both of them.
For Sonia, it reaffirms her faith, provides solace. But for Raskolnikov, it's a different story.
Right, he's confronted with something he doesn't understand.
Yeah, this power beyond his comprehension.
A power that can overcome death itself.
And it shakes him,
It does. It challenges his nihilistic worldview.
After the reading, there's this heavy silence.
A palpable silence.
Yeah, the room is dark. The candle is flickering.
It's a very charged atmosphere.
And then Raskolnikov just starts talking.
What does he say?
He tells Sonia that he's abandoned his family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he calls himself and Sonia accursed.
Accursed.
Yeah,
Huh.
and he even suggests they embark on a shared path together.
What do you think he's trying to do?
It's hard to say. I think he's caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Maybe he's seeking connection with Sonia,
Yeah, he's definitely drawn to her.
but at the same time, he's pushing her away.
Right, like he wants to share his burden.
But he also wants to protect her from it.
It's a very conflicted state of mind.
And then, just as he's leaving, he drops a bombshell.
What's that?
He promises to tell Sonia who killed Lizaveta,
Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's sister.
the very same.
Why tell Sonia?
I think he recognizes something in her,
What's that?
a capacity for understanding and forgiveness that he doesn't find anywhere else.
He's drawn to her purity, her faith.
Yeah. And he needs her absolution.
Even if he doesn't realize it consciously.
So Sonia is left with this heavy weight
The weight of his confession.
and the unsettling questions he's raised.
It's a powerful ending to a powerful scene.
Dostoyevsky is a master of leaving you wanting more.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how Dostoyevsky uses these biblical parallels to really highlight those inner struggles.
Oh, absolutely. The story of Lazarus is so much more than just a plot device.
Right.
It becomes this lens through which we can understand the character's hopes and fears and anxieties, you know?
Right. And it's interesting how the story impacts Sonia and Raskolnikov in such different ways.
Yeah. For Sonia, it's a source of strength and affirmation.
Right.
It deepens her faith, gives her solace.
But for Raskolnikov,
It's almost like a threat.
yeah,
It challenges his whole nihilistic worldview, forces him to confront this power that he can't explain or control.
that brings us to a really important question that's been kind of weaving its way through both of these novels.
What's that?
The role of faith,
Mm-hmm.
How does faith function in a world that's full of suffering and darkness?
It's a huge question, right? And we see it play out so differently in Mishkin and Sonia.
Right. They both have this really deep, almost childlike faith.
Yeah, but their circumstances are so different.
Very different.
Mishkin is an outsider. He's naive.
Yeah.
He sees the good in everyone, even when they don't deserve it.
Right.
Sonia, on the other hand,
She's had to face the harsh realities of the world.
exactly, poverty, exploitation.
Yeah.
But her faith is what sustains her.
It's her lifeline.
Absolutely. So how does that faith both protect and challenge them?
I mean, it's like a paradox, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a double-edged sword.
It gives them strength and resilience,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes them vulnerable.
Right. To manipulation, disappointment.
Yeah, I think that tension between the protective
Mm-hmm.
and the challenging aspects of faith.
It's at the heart of Dostoyevsky's work.
It is. It's what makes his characters so relatable, so human.
And so relevant even today.
As we wrap up our deep dive into these fascinating excerpts,
Mm-hmm.
what are your biggest takeaways? What has this exploration revealed about Dostoyevsky's understanding of the human condition?
I think what strikes me most is his empathy.
Empathy.
He has this incredible ability to step into the shoes of his characters,
Yeah.
to see the world through their eyes.
Even when they're flawed or even downright bad.
Exactly. He doesn't shy away from their darkness.
But he doesn't judge them either.
Right. He presents them in all their complexity.
And that's what makes his work so powerful, so enduring.
It forces us to confront our own humanity,
To see ourselves reflected in these characters.
even the ones we might not like.
Right. And to recognize that even in the darkest corners of the human heart,
There's always a flicker of hope,
the possibility of redemption,
the potential for growth.
and for finding meaning in a world that can often feel very chaotic.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of Dostoyevsky's writing, I think.
I agree. So for our listeners who are eager to delve deeper into Dostoyevsky's world, where would you recommend they go next?
Oh, definitely. The Brothers Karamazov.
A classic.
It takes all of these themes that we've been talking about today.
Faith, doubt, morality.
It just explodes them.
It's a really intense read.
It is, but it's so worth it.
It's definitely a novel that will stay with you long after you finish it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
I always learn so much from these conversations.
Me too.
And for our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the world of literature.
There's always something new to discover. Please let me know if I can assist you with any other transcript rewrites. Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Dostoevsky.
Oh boy, are we going deep today.
You bet. We've got excerpts from The Brothers Karamazov and The Adolescent, plus some biographical stuff, and an afterword. It's like a Dostoevsky buffet.
A feast for the mind.
Right. So we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going deep into Dostoevsky's ideas about faith and suffering and what it even means to be human. Big stuff.
And the cool thing is we've got all these different angles to explore. Mystical visions, philosophical debates, even some pretty sharp social commentary.
It's like Dostoevsky is constantly poking at us, making us think about life's big questions.
Exactly. And he doesn't give us easy answers either. He's like, hey, figure it out yourself.
All right, so let's start with Alyosha's vision in The Brothers Karamazov. He's totally wrecked after his elder dies, Father Zosima, and then he has this wild dream at the coffin.
Oh, yeah. The one where...
Yeah, he hears the gospel story of the wedding at Cana and sees the elder partying with the guests.
Like he's back from the dead having a blast.
Right, so what do you make of that?
Well, it's definitely not your average dream. And remember, Dostoevsky himself went through a lot. Prison, exile, losing people he loved. But he somehow found meaning in all that pain, even beauty. It's kind of like...
Like Alyosha's vision is showing us how to find joy even when things are falling apart.
Exactly. Maybe suffering isn't always a bad thing. What if it helps us understand joy in a deeper way, like they're connected somehow?
So you're saying maybe we shouldn't always try to avoid suffering.
Well, think about it. We spend so much energy running from pain, but what if leaning into it, really feeling it, could actually bring us closer to a different kind of joy?
That's a really interesting idea. I mean, we've all had those moments where life just feels impossible.
Exactly. But maybe Dostoevsky's saying, hey, look closer. There's light and connection even in the dark places.
Okay, so we've got this idea of finding joy amidst suffering. And that kind of connects to the stuff you shared from The Adolescent, right? With Makar and his conversations with Arkady. One's a monk dealing with loss. The other's a former serf with a whole different view on things.
Totally. And what's wild is how Makar embraces both faith and science. Like he sees scientific discoveries as proof of God's design, not disproof.
Right. He's got that awesome anecdote about the microscope, how some people are filled with awe and others just get more doubtful. It's like the same experience can have totally opposite effects depending on who's looking.
It's so true. And it shows how differently we all react to the same thing. For Makar, science doesn't kill faith. It makes it stronger. Like he sees God's fingerprints everywhere, from tiny little microbes to the whole vast universe.
But then he calls intellectuals restless, like their search for knowledge takes them further from simple faith. Kind of ironic coming from Dostoevsky, a super intellectual writer.
Right. It's like he's poking fun at himself a little.
So maybe Makar is challenging us to step back from all the thinking and analyzing and just be open to something bigger than ourselves.
Maybe. And remember, Dostoevsky's not saying be dumb and believe everything. He's saying it's okay to have doubts, to question things, but also to be open to mystery.
It makes you realize how we always try to put people in boxes, religious or secular, when it's really way more complicated than that.
Totally. People are messy. Faith is messy. Dostoevsky gets that.
Okay, so we've got Alyosha's vision of joy, Makar's take on faith and science. Where do we go from here?
Well, in the Brothers Karamazov, there's also Father Zosima, the wise elder. And he's got a whole different level of, like, philosophical wisdom about faith and life.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like the simple faith type like Makar. He's more like a deep thinker.
Definitely. Zosima's the real deal.
Okay, but we'll have to save that for part 2. Can't overload everyone with Dostoevsky all at once, right?
Good point. Got to leave him wanting more.
All right, so last time we were just getting into Father Zosima's teachings and the Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, he's not messing around. He's like, hey, look in the mirror. See that darkness? We all got it.
You were saying he's got a more philosophical approach to faith than Makar. How so?
Well, Makar's faith is like pure instinct. He just feels God everywhere. It's beautiful. But Zosima has spent years thinking about this stuff, wrestling with doubts, coming to grips with the hard questions. You know?
Makes sense. You shared that bit where he talks about monks being these, like, guardians of faith in Russia, almost like they could lead the country to salvation.
Right. But it's not just about dogma and rituals for Zosima. Faith has got to be active. It should push us towards compassion and action, fighting for justice.
He sounds pretty down on modern society, though. Like, all that chasing after desires just leads to emptiness.
It's funny, he was writing way back then, but it's like he's talking about us now, always wanting more stuff, more status. But does it ever really satisfy us?
Yeah, it's like a hamster wheel. We just keep running and running.
Exactly. And Zosima is saying true happiness comes from deeper stuff, real relationships, showing compassion, making a difference.
And he gets pretty specific, too. Like with masters and servants, he says there should be mutual respect, brotherly love. He even imagines a future where everyone's serving each other.
Whoa, yeah. He's way ahead of his time, flipping the whole power structure on its head.
So he's this wise, compassionate figure, but then he drops this bombshell about hell, and it's not what you'd expect.
Oh, yeah, forget the fire and brimstone. Zosima's hell is way scarier. It's the inability to love.
Ooh, that's deep.
It is, right? To see love all around you but be totally cut off from it, trapped in your own ego. That's Dostoevsky's vision of true suffering.
Makes you wonder if we're all kind of creating our own little hells right here on Earth. By pushing people away, holding on to anger.
Ooh, good point. Maybe the path to heaven, to real happiness, starts with choosing love and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Even when it's tough.
So no love equals hell. Got it. What's the antidote? What does Zosima say we should do?
He says we got to take on the burden of other people's sins, seek forgiveness, and pray, pray, pray.
Pray for everyone, right? Even the people who drive us nuts.
Especially those people. It's about expanding our compassion, seeing ourselves in everyone, even our so-called enemies.
It's a tall order, that's for sure. But how did Dostoevsky arrive at all this?
Well, think about his life. Prison, exile, poverty, illness. He went through the ringer. And those experiences shaped his whole worldview.
So Zosima's words aren't just some ivory tower philosophy. It's wisdom forged in the fires of suffering. His own suffering.
Exactly. He's not preaching from some safe distance. He's been in the trenches. And he's saying, hey, there's meaning to be found here, even redemption.
And then, just when you think you've got a handle on it, he throws in this mysterious hidden longing for something beyond this world.
Yeah, that part always gets me. Like, there's this part of us that wants more than just the everyday stuff. We're searching for transcendence.
So is that what's going on with Alyosha's vision and Makar's faith? Are they tapping into this higher realm?
It's like Dostoevsky believed faith and wonder go hand in hand. That we're not just physical beings, you know? We've got this spiritual side that's hungry for something bigger.
Maybe these mystical experiences are like guideposts, pointing us towards that love and forgiveness Zosima is talking about.
It's a beautiful thought, right? And speaking of different perspectives, we've got to talk about Karl Nossel's afterword.
Right. He gives us a totally different angle on Dostoevsky's spiritual journey. Like, he went from rebel to someone who found peace in suffering, almost like a spiritual hero's journey or something.
And he calls The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor Dostoevsky's big faith statement. Which, wow, what a story. Have you had a chance to read it?
Oh, yeah, it's intense. Still trying to wrap my head around it.
It's a tough one, for sure. But I think unpacking it together could be really eye-opening.
Okay, let's do it. but I have a feeling this conversation deserves its own deep dive.
You're probably right. We'll save The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor for part 3. It needs our full attention.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor.
Buckle up, this one's a wild ride.
You called it Dostoyevsky's ultimate statement about faith, right?
I did. And it's a story within a story, remember?
Yeah.
It's Ivan, one of the Karamazov brothers, telling it to Alyosha.
Yeah, to kind of explain his own issues with faith, right?
Exactly. It's like Ivan's wrestling match with belief played out in this epic tale.
Okay, for anyone who hasn't read it, what's the gist?
So picture this.
Okay.
Jesus comes back to Earth during the Spanish Inquisition. He's doing miracles, healing people, the whole 9 yards. But instead of being welcomed as a savior, he gets arrested by the Grand Inquisitor.
Wait, what? Why?
Because the Inquisitor thinks Jesus messed up big time by giving humanity too much freedom.
Oh yeah, like free will is too heavy a burden or something.
Exactly. The Inquisitor's whole argument is that people don't actually want freedom. They want to be told what to believe, how to live, how to get to heaven.
Which is exactly what the church provides, right? According to the Inquisitor, at least.
Bingo. He actually says Jesus should have gone for the easy route, like offer people bread and circuses, and they'll follow you blindly.
But instead, Jesus offered something way more challenging. The freedom to choose your own path, even if it leads to suffering.
Right. And that's the heart of the story. What's better? Freedom with all its risks. Or security and obedience, even if it means giving up your individuality.
Man, it's a tough question. Where does Dostoyevsky stand on all this? Is he Team Jesus or Team Inquisitor?
That's a million-dollar question. And like always with Dostoyevsky, he doesn't give us a straight answer. He's like, here's this crazy dilemma. Go wrestle with it yourselves.
So we're left with this tension between freedom and security.
Exactly. And I think that reflects Dostoyevsky's own struggles with faith. He had his doubts, even rejected traditional Christianity at times. But in the end, I think the Legend of the Grand Inquisitor shows that he was drawn to that Christian message of love and forgiveness, even if he knew faith was complicated.
It's interesting how this story connects to the stuff we talked about earlier. Like Zosima saying we should take on other people's sins almost sounds like what the Inquisitor is doing, right? Taking away freedom because people are too weak to handle it.
Whoa, good catch.
Yeah.
It shows how even good intentions can go wrong. Like, where's the line between helping someone and controlling them? Between guidance and force? Tricky stuff.
And how does this all tie back to finding joy in suffering? Does the Legend of the Grand Inquisitor have anything to say about that?
I think it does. Maybe the Inquisitor, by trying to shield people from suffering, is actually robbing them of true joy. The kind that comes from choosing to love, even when it hurts.
So real joy can't be forced on you. It has to be chosen, even if it means embracing pain and doubt.
Exactly. Maybe true faith isn't about blind obedience or seeking comfort. Maybe it's about facing the hard stuff head on.
Right.
Wrestling with your doubts.
Yeah.
Choosing love even when it's tough.
Okay, I'm officially mind blown. This deep dive has been intense. As we wrap things up, what are some key takeaways you hope listeners will hold on to?
Well, first, I hope they realize how incredibly deep Dostoyevsky's work is.
Yeah.
He wasn't just writing stories. He was exploring what it means to be human.
On the deepest level.
And he never gives us easy answers.
Right. Never. He wants us to think for ourselves, question everything, and embrace the fact that life is messy and full of contradictions. And maybe in that messiness, in that struggle to figure things out, we actually discover something profound about ourselves.
Exactly. I think Dostoyevsky would say, never stop searching, never stop questioning, and never stop trying to become a better, more loving person.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks for guiding us through all this.
It was my pleasure. And to all you listeners out there, keep exploring Dostoyevsky. You never know what treasures you might find. Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some seriously deep waters today. We're going to be talking about The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor.
Oh, yeah. This one is heavy.
Right. It's a story, well, actually, it's like a story within a story. It's from Dostoyevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. We've got this excerpt from a book about Dostoyevsky and the Gospel. And let me tell you, it gets pretty intense.
Intense is an understatement, I think. It really delves into the heart of human nature, faith, freedom, suffering.
All the good stuff.
Exactly, and it does it in such a compelling way, through this incredibly dramatic narrative.
Yeah, so the story starts in Seville, right?
Yep.
During the time of the Inquisition. And we have this scene, it's like something out of the Bible. You know, Jesus returns.
And he's not just, making a quiet entrance. He's performing miracles left and right, healing the sick, even raising a child from the dead.
Oh, yeah. Dostoyevsky doesn't hold back on the imagery. the weeping mourners, the smell of lemon and laurel in the air.
It's all very deliberate, you know? It evokes those familiar gospel narratives. But it also sets the stage for something, well, something unexpected.
Because then we meet the Grand Inquisitor.
And he's not exactly a welcoming committee, is he?
Not at all. I mean, this guy is old, he's powerful, he's the head honcho of the Inquisition, and he is not happy to see Jesus back in town. He arrests him.
And then launches into this incredible monologue. It's like the heart of the whole story.
Yeah, it's like Dostoyevsky is saying, okay, you think you know the story of Jesus, think again.
Exactly. And it's such a powerful reversal, right? I mean, you expect the church to be on Jesus' side, but suddenly the church, represented by this imposing figure of the Inquisitor, becomes the adversary.
It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here?
It completely flips the script on its head. And at the core of the Inquisitor's argument is this radical idea. Humanity can't handle true freedom. We're too weak, too easily tempted, too drawn to the comfort of security and happiness.
So he's saying that Jesus' whole message of free will was a big mistake.
In a nutshell, yes. He sees it as a well-intentioned but ultimately naive attempt to elevate humanity to a spiritual level we just can't reach. The Inquisitor thinks that freedom just leads to suffering and chaos. It's too much for most people to bear.
Okay, I see where he's coming from, but, I mean, is he right? Is freedom really that bad?
Well, that's the question that Dostoyevsky forces us to confront. And the Inquisitor makes a pretty compelling case.
He does, especially when he brings up the 3 temptations of Jesus in the wilderness. You know, turning stones to bread, leaping from the temple, accepting worldly power.
Ah, yes, the classic temptations.
And the Inquisitor actually says that Jesus should have given in to them, because that's what humanity really wants and needs.
Right. He frames these temptations not as temptations at all, but as acts of compassion. He says, you know, if Jesus really wanted to help humanity, he would have provided for their basic needs, offered undeniable proof of his divinity, and established a single unified world order. Peace and happiness through, well, control.
It's kind of a chilling argument when you think about it. Like, are we really that willing to trade our freedom for a little comfort and security?
It's a question that cuts to the core of human nature, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder, what would you choose? A life free from worry and doubt, even if it meant giving up some of your freedom?
That's a tough one. And it leads us to the Inquisitor's next point, doesn't it? He basically boasts that the church has done exactly what Jesus refused to do.
Oh yeah, he's proud of it. He says they provide the miracles, the mystery, the authority, even if it's all, let's say, a little embellished. Or, as some might say, based on a flexible interpretation of the truth.
Bit of creative storytelling, perhaps?
Exactly, but his point is that it works. He believes it makes people happy, or at least it keeps them obedient. He's basically saying that the masses can't handle the truth. They need something to believe in, even if it's a lie.
So we're all just sheep,
Yeah.
blindly following the shepherd.
That's a pretty harsh way to put it. But the Inquisitor definitely believes that most people are simply not capable of making their own choices. They need to be led. They need someone to tell them what to do, what to believe.
It's a pretty bleak view of human nature, I gotta say.
It is, but it's also a view that a lot of people throughout history have shared. And it makes this story so unsettling because it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Maybe we are more drawn to comfort and security than we'd like to admit. Maybe we do crave easy answers. Maybe freedom really is more burdensome than we can handle.
I don't know. It's definitely something to think about. It makes you wonder, if someone offered you a life free from worry, free from doubt, would you take it? Even if it meant giving up some of your individual freedom.
It's a question that has haunted philosophers and theologians for centuries. And Dostoyevsky brings it to life in such a vivid, dramatic way. He really makes you feel the weight of these questions.
He does. And he doesn't give us any easy answers. He just leaves us with this incredible story, this clash between Jesus and the Inquisitor, and forces us to grapple with the implications.
And that's what makes the legend of the Grand Inquisitor so powerful. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about faith, freedom, and human nature.
Yeah, it really does. And what gets me is, how does Jesus react to all of this? I mean, the Inquisitor just ripped into him, accused him of failing humanity.
And the most striking thing is Jesus' response, or rather, his lack of response. Silence. Throughout this entire tirade, Jesus doesn't say a word.
You'd think he'd have something to say, right? I mean, wouldn't you defend yourself?
It's the silence that makes it so powerful, I think. So much more potent than any words could be. It makes you wonder what's going on in his mind. Is it an acknowledgement, acceptance, or maybe a silent condemnation?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Dostoyevsky leaves it open to interpretation, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it so brilliant. It forces us, the readers, to engage with these questions on a deeper level, to wrestle with the ambiguity. What do you think the silence means?
Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me thinks it's like a recognition of the weight of the Inquisitor's argument. Like,
Mm.
Jesus sees the suffering, the temptation, the very human desire for comfort and security, and he doesn't dismiss it.
Right. It's not a simple case of right or wrong. The Inquisitor, as misguided as he might be, genuinely believes he's doing what's best for humanity, and Jesus seems to acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's like he understands where he's coming from. But then just when you think you've got it figured out, Jesus does something completely unexpected. He kisses the Inquisitor.
Talk about a plot twist, right? This quiet, tender kiss on the lips. What do you make
Like,
of that?
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, is it forgiveness? Compassion? Defiance? What do you think? What's Dostoevsky trying to say here?
Well, like everything else in this story, the kiss is open to multiple interpretations. It could be seen as an act of divine forgiveness, right? Love for even the most hardened sinner. Or maybe it's a silent rebuke, a rejection of the Inquisitor's ideology.
I hadn't thought about that. Like, your words mean nothing to me. I offer you only love. Powerful stuff.
It is, and it adds another layer to their complex relationship, doesn't it? You have this clash of ideologies, these diametrically opposed worldviews, but then you have this moment of human connection, of shared vulnerability. It's really quite beautiful in a way.
It is. But it doesn't change the Inquisitor, does it? I mean, he lets Jesus go, but he doesn't seem to have a change of heart.
No, he sticks to his guns, so to speak. He still believes he's right, that his way, the church's way, is ultimately the best way to ensure the happiness and stability of humanity, even after this encounter with the divine.
It's like that old saying, there are none so blind as those who will not see.
Exactly. And it leaves us with this unsettling feeling, this unresolved conflict. What do you think Dostoevsky is saying about faith and doubt with this ending?
Well, it seems like he's saying that there are no easy answers. The Inquisitor represents the enduring power of doubt, right? The temptation to choose comfort and security over the uncertainties of faith and freedom.
Right. And it makes you wonder if even the Grand Inquisitor, after meeting Jesus face to face, can't shake off his doubts, then what hope is there for the rest of us?
Maybe it's not about erasing doubt completely. Maybe it's about learning to live with it, to wrestle with those big questions without expecting easy answers.
I think that's a great point. It's about embracing the complexity, the ambiguity, and recognizing that faith and doubt often coexist within us.
They do, don't they? And maybe that's okay. Maybe that tension, that struggle, is what makes us human.
Maybe it's what keeps us searching, keeps us growing. The Inquisitor, in his own way, highlights the importance of that search, even though he arrives at, let's say, a less than ideal conclusion.
It makes me think about our own lives, you know? How often do we choose the easy path, the comfortable narrative, even if it means sacrificing some of our freedom or compromising our values?
All the time, right? We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us what to think, what to believe, what to buy, and it's so easy to just go along with it, to avoid the discomfort of questioning, of challenging the status quo.
It is. But stories like The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor remind us that it's important to resist that temptation, to keep asking questions, keep searching for truth, even if it's messy, even if it's uncomfortable.
Because ultimately, that search, that struggle, is what gives our lives meaning. And maybe, just maybe, it's what brings us closer to something greater than ourselves.
It really does. And what's so powerful about this story is that it leaves you with more questions than answers. Like, what do you think Dostoyevsky is trying to say about faith and doubt?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that he's not giving us any easy answers. I mean, the Inquisitor is so compelling, so articulate. He presents this really strong argument against faith, against the idea that humanity can handle true freedom.
He does, doesn't he? But then there's Jesus, completely silent. It's almost like Dostoyevsky is saying, look, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. You got to wrestle with this yourself.
Right. And that's what makes it so thought-provoking. Because it forces us to confront our own doubts, our own temptations. I mean, who hasn't struggled with the desire for comfort and security, even if it means compromising our values or giving up some of our freedom?
Exactly. It's like the Inquisitor is this dark reflection of our own desires, you know, the part of us that longs for easy answers, for someone to tell us what to do, what to believe.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. He's like this shadow figure representing the doubts and fears that we all carry within us. And the fact that he's so intelligent, so well-spoken, makes him even more unsettling.
He does, right.
Yeah.
It's not like he's some cartoon villain. He genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. And that's what makes his challenge to Jesus so powerful?
It does. And it forces us to ask ourselves, what would we do in that situation? If faced with those same temptations, the temptation to provide for people's material needs, the temptation to offer undeniable proof of the divine, the temptation to establish a unified world order, would we be able to resist? Or would we be swayed by the promise of peace and happiness, even if it came at the cost of freedom?
Oof, I don't know. It's a tough question. And I think that's exactly what Dostoyevsky wanted us to feel. He wanted us to squirm a little, to confront the complexity of these issues.
He did, and he doesn't let us off the hook with a simple answer. He doesn't tell us who's right or wrong, who to believe, what path to choose. He just presents us with this incredibly powerful story and says, okay, now what are you going to do with it?
It's a challenge, that's for sure. But I think that's what makes The Legend of the Grand Inquisitor such a masterpiece. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. It makes you think, it makes you question, it makes you uncomfortable. And that's a good thing.
I agree. It's not a story that you can just passively consume. It demands your attention, your engagement. It forces you to confront some really difficult questions about faith, freedom, and human nature. And ultimately, I think that's why it's so enduringly relevant.
Absolutely, because those questions, those struggles, are timeless. They're something that every generation grapples with.
They're not going away anytime soon.
Oh, they're not. So I guess the best we can do is keep thinking, keep questioning, keep searching for our own truth, even if it's messy, even if it's uncomfortable, because that's what it means to be human.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's the beauty of it, right? The ongoing search, the never-ending quest for meaning and understanding. That's what keeps us alive, what keeps us growing.
Well said. And that's a wrap on another deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the depths of Dostoyevsky's masterpiece. We hope you've enjoyed the ride.
It's been a pleasure. And as always, keep those minds open and those questions coming.